Number 10. Unmasking. During the events of Civil War, Spider-Man ultimately decided to side with Iron Man, and to prove how loyal he was to the cause, he even decided to publicly unmask, to show just how much he believed in his friend Tony Stark and the idea of the Superhuman Registration Act. However, this turned out to be the wrong choice for Peter in the end. Not only was his life at risk as a result of his choice, and as a result of ultimately changing his mind, but also the lives of those he loved were threatened as well. Peter Parker almost ended up being shot to death at the behest of Kingpin, who put a hit out on him, and as a result of surviving that, being nearly missed, Aunt May instead ended up taking a bullet and almost lost her life, being put into intensive care. Peter Parker would also end up losing his marriage after he and Mary Jane made a deal with Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life. So really, it's pretty impressive that Peter managed to survive this whole overall fairly awful ordeal, both when it comes to keeping his life and keeping his sanity. Number 9. Witnessing Aunt May's romance. During a time where Peter swapped bodies with Dr. Octopus, he found himself trapped in his body and in Dr. Ock's mind. Because of this, Peter ended up forced to watch a memory that Otto had of a night of passion with Peter's own Aunt May before their almost wedding at the time. Sure, Peter has survived a lot of physical beatings and extremely devastating disasters, but the emotional trauma of this one, I do not know how he did it. Peter obviously did not want to see this, and yet he was forced to. And still afterward, he manages to be able to look both Otto and Aunt May in the eye when he needs to. I do not know how though. Not only did Peter survive this, by the way, but also survived witnessing all the beatings from Otto's perspective that he, as Spider-Man, had given him via Otto's memories. That is some mental and emotional durability right there. Although I guess this version of Peter kind of died, as he only managed to survive via his subconscious after this. Here's hoping he managed to forget this at least. Somehow. Maybe because only his subconscious kind of survived, his consciousness of this is like, boop, gone. I hope so. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about some more crazy things that Spider-Man has survived, there's lots out there, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Electrocuted and thrown from a skyscraper. During the events of Marvel Knight's Spider-Man, as early as the 3rd issue in, Spider-Man gets badly beaten and ends up in such a bad way that he is rushed to the ER. This all happens after Aunt May has seemingly been kidnapped. In this much darker take on Spider-Man's world, as written by Mark Miller, Spider-Man confronts Electro and the Vulture, suspecting they may have been involved. During this fight, Spider-Man gets badly electrocuted more than once by Electro. In fact, at one point he is so severely and dramatically electrocuted that he ends up being flinged from a skyscraper and plummets to the ground, before he can recover enough to even shoot a web and swing to safety. Instead, he smashes all the way down and through a cab, knocked unconscious and badly injured. The paramedics then rush him to the hospital. That is how severely Electro injured him. Of course, this is Spider-Man, and somehow, miraculously, he manages to survive, but whew, it was definitely a close call. Number 7. Sinister War. Sinister War also really scrambled Spider-Man up. I mean, what's worse than one team of 6 sinister villains? How about a whole bunch of Sinister Six teams? Which is exactly the trial that Peter faced during Sinister War. Pretty much all of the villains he came up against seemed to also want Spider-Man for one reason or another. And while some fought to actually protect Spidey, many more were fighting to harm, capture, or perhaps even kill him. Needless to say, it was one long night for Spider-Man, with him dealing with fight after fight to the point that he couldn't even catch his breath. Number 6. Missile Explosion. During issues 523 and 524 of The Amazing Spider-Man, we learned that Spider-Man managed to survive the explosion of a massive missile that was filled with toxins. Not only did we see Peter survive the explosion, but he also survived the fallout after being saved by Iron Man. Stark secured Peter and took him back to the Avengers Mansion as quickly as possible so that he could treat him for the toxins he had been exposed to and his injuries. Fortunately, Peter is so durable, with such a tough immune system apparently, that he was able to fight off most of the effects until Stark managed to treat him, and in so doing, Stark saved his life. It's pretty convenient. He also happened to arrive at just the right time, as Peter was also about to fall at terminal velocity into the ocean, the impact of which could have killed him. Quite lucky that he's so tough and that Iron Man arrived in the nick of time. That all worked out pretty well. Number 5. Becoming brain dead. In issue number 115 of the original Brave and the Bold series, Batman is left brain dead after he's electrocuted by a trap while on a team up with the Atom, where he is trying to solve a case. The Atom knows that while Batman is currently brain dead, he only has hours left before the rest of his organs and his body will completely fail him. Instead of trying to find some way to get some sort of miraculous medical attention, he does what any good friend and colleague would do and decides to help Batman solve his final case. The Atom shrinks down, jumps inside Batman's body, and puppets Batman around from the inside, sort of like a Weekend at Bernie's style. Fortunately, this somehow fixes Batman's impending death and brain deadness, so not only does the case get solved by Batman, but he's also saved by the Atom's weird machinations. Good job, I guess? I'm glad it all works out in the end. Love when people are like, you're dead, but also I just jumped around on your organs, so now you're alive again. Yay. Number 4. Nuclear explosion. Or at least a nuclear level kryptonite missile explosion. Still, this was a pretty crazy one. In the Justice League Unlimited episode The Doomsday Sanction, Batman is forced to pursue a missile en route to destroy an entire island, and Superman and Doomsday along with it, who are entangled in a battle with one another on said island. When the missiles from his own craft won't work due to the kryptonite missile having magnetic repulsor shielding, Batman is forced to move the missile with his own ship. He does so and manages to successfully divert it, ejecting an escape pod at the last minute before it explodes. However, the explosion that we see happen is like a nuclear level fiery red mushroom cloud kind. It creates a giant tsunami which hits the island and impacts Batman's escape pod, causing him to lose communication with the rest of the League. Fortunately, he manages to survive somehow. I guess that was one strong escape pod and one strong Batman? Though Bruce is definitely worse for wear by the end of this episode, confined to bed rest and sporting a neck brace when we see him at the end. Number 3. And buried alive again! At this point, I'm like, I need to do a list of all the times that Batman was buried alive, because it happens so frequently. Another time when Bruce was buried alive, it was under a bunch of skulls and bones in the catacombs below Gotham. The Riddler set off explosives that left him buried completely under dirt and bones, while all we're left with at the end of issue 27 is a hand coming up out of the dirt. The following story issue, issue 29 in this case, Bruce seems to find the inner strength to emerge from all that dirt, although how he's able to get the leverage to pull himself up there, I have no idea. I don't know how that logically would work. Being completely buried in compounded dirt is challenging to get out of without having some kind of help or leverage. Something basically to use to pull yourself out, or hopefully something to pull you out of the dirt. And in this case, he doesn't have any of that. But I guess this is Batman, and so his inner will and his strength, as well as those outer muscles and his sense of determination, is really all he needs. So he's just like, ah, I did it. If there's anything I've learned from Batman, you can do anything if you just focus hard enough and you're determined and you believe. Number 2. Dodges Omega Beams. Speaking of things that seem impossible, but if you believe, Bruce might just be a human guy with no superpowers, but he has proven time and time again how indestructible and skilled he is, like when he faced Darkseid at the end of the Justice League Unlimited animated series. While facing off with the epic villain Darkseid fired his Omega Beams at Batman. The Omega Beam is a power that is notorious for being accurate and just like never missing its target. You may have seen it before and noticed all those sharp angles involved every time Darkseid fires it. That's actually because it moves around any objects that are in the way of its target, also chasing said target down until it is hit. Now in the animated series, however, this wasn't the case, as Batman manages to dodge the beam by basically putting a parademon in its way. This causes the beam to strike and vaporize the parademon, leaving Batman safe. Darkseid is impressed, and I think all of us watching are too, because that's like impossible. Impressive, Darkseid says. No one has ever dodged my Omega Beam. That's probably because it's not even possible, Darkseid. And yet. Number 1. Omega Sanction. Maybe one of the craziest things that Bruce has survived was when he took the Omega Sanction straight to the face from Darkseid, or straight to the sides of the head, I guess, more specifically. The Omega Sanction is an unstoppable force, but Not for Batman. While Batman was seemingly vaporized in this fight, in reality this was actually a clone and he himself had survived. Instead, Batman was transported through time and ended up having crazy adventures through time as he attempted to return home. But of course, for a long while, with his charred skeleton present after the fact of his not real death, many of us thought this might be the end this time for Batman. Of course, based on everything that has happened to this man prior that hasn't managed to kill him permanently yet, we maybe should have known better. You can't kill Batman. Not even Darkseid's Omega Sanction can. And Batman apparently in the animated world can just dodge Omega beams, so he's invincible.
In at 10, Rainbow Raider. Rage is never really a good thing to suppress. Trust me, I've had my fair share of suppressed emotions, but eventually everything you feel will come boiling to the surface and it will be worse than before. This was demonstrated in the first CW crossover between Arrow and the Flash called Flash vs. Arrow, where Barry gets whammied by Rainbow Raider and starts getting pretty pissed. So mad in fact that it's kind of like the DC TV version of Bully Maguire. No matter, I'm honestly surprised that the rage just didn't kill Barry or cause him to go so insane that someone had to kill him. I mean, like, obviously they wouldn't, that would never be the case, but still, like, in a realistic scenario, or as realistic as we can get with superpowered beings, he would in my mind have gotten himself killed at some point during this altercation. If Reverse Flash wasn't stuck in 2014, I'm sure that he would have taken that opportunity to, like, you know, right in his chest. In at 9, Flashpoint, a timeline of Barry's own creation where his mother doesn't die and he thus doesn't become the Flash. Oh, and don't forget the fact that Aquaman and Wonder Woman are at war, because Barry's mom doesn't die. And at the very least in the animated movie, this resulted in them destroying the world, literally destroying the planet. Barry has to run back in time and stop himself from saving his mother, letting her die just so that he can save the planet. But in this case, Flash literally outruns the destruction of a globe, of a planet, and does so in order to let his mom die. Like, holy crap, that's insane. I don't know if I would have the strength to do that. So, to me, it's pretty ridiculous that Barry firstly survived the destruction of the world, and then survived having to sacrifice his mother. Both emotionally and physically surviving this is pretty damn impressive in my personal opinion. He should either have exploded with the rest of the world, or not been strong enough to sacrifice his mother. Like, either way, she dies, right? So, like, you might as well keep your father out of prison and give her, like, another decade of life, right? In at 8, Injustice. Barry siding with Superman and his regime during the beginning of Injustice is certainly one of the dumbest things he's done. I mean, Barry is faster than Superman, we've seen it many times. Barry left him in the dust at one point while trying to return to the Speed Force to sacrifice himself, saying that all their other races were for charity. So, siding with Superman doesn't really do much for you. It's not like he can catch you if you decide to join Batman's insurgency. And considering how you sacrificed your mother for this planet's survival, I'm sure that you'd have normally been against these ideals. I mean, he ended up agreeing with Shazam when he said that leveling cities was too far. And then that's when Barry decides to leave, after they've killed Billy. Why did you join in the first place? Bro, I don't get it. It makes no sense to me. If I were Superman, I would have just killed the Flash instantly, no matter what side he was on, because in reality, he's like the only one who could pose a threat to me. This also brings up another question. If Barry did the whole vibrating hand thing, so that like Reverse Flash does, so that he was the frequency of air, could he kill Superman? Or would he need like a Kryptonian glove? But like, he's air, right? So he should be able to pass through his chest. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. And at 7, Savitar. The fact that Barry was able to survive the whole Savitar thing from the Flash season 3 will always escape me. I won't really ever understand how they ended up defeating a literal future version of Barry. I get how they managed to do it, but that was incredibly unrealistic, even for a show about a man who can run at the speed of light. Since technically Savitar would have known beforehand that the timeline was changing, since technically that should, in my brain at least, be how time travel works. Like, something changes, even if the current Barry doesn't know it yet, the Barry of the future would, because he would have to be from that time, right? That's just how it would work. But that's not how it works in the show, so that's fine, I guess. I don't see how it would ever have been possible to beat a future version of the Flash without this, but like, I know that he couldn't really die, since if he died, Savitar wouldn't be able to happen, despite his taunting in earlier episodes. I feel like that was just a way to prevent Barry from killing himself to stop him, but still, you shouldn't have won against Savitar, straight up. And at 6, DeVoe. The Flash Season 4 is not a favorite among fans. We all thought that we wanted a non-speedster as the main villain for a season, however, some dude who can literally think a lot was not what we had envisioned. But honestly, looking at what DeVoe was able to do, he was even more powerful than Savitar, who was literally a future version of Barry. Like, DeVoe could accurately predict every single thing that was going to happen, and the only way they could defeat him was by getting his wife on their side, getting Barry out of prison, and then somehow having Ralph take over his mind again from inside DeVoe, or like inside of his mind that DeVoe was controlling, and then not having any of the other powers that DeVoe had when he was in Ralph's body, which I don't understand. That whole ordeal, okay, was probably realistically impossible, but they somehow managed to pull it off. DeVoe should have been the end of Barry and the entirety of Team Flash. Like, as soon as Barry came out of the Speed Force, DeVoe should have killed him. Like, he made the bus metas and then he got out. Like, now you don't need to worry, right? You've offed him. Or like, kill Barry as soon as like he did what you needed him to do. Like, as soon as he trained Ralph enough, you just go and you off Barry and then you take over Ralph. Most of the villains in these shows fail because they make like one stupid mistake. Okay? And this is why I'm the hero, because if I was the villain, I wouldn't make dumb mistakes and the world would have been destroyed already.
Coming in at number 5, we have Tony sacrificing himself by flying directly into a psionic storm. During a period of time in which Marvel was looking to reboot their comic book universe, the villain known as Onslaught was waging war against the entire 616 plane of existence. A combination of the darkest parts of both Professor X and Magneto, Onslaught was a creature of pure psychic energy that was only able to be defeated when the Hulk managed to finally rip open his armor. Unfortunately, the only way to stop Onslaught was the destruction of the universe, a dramatic sacrifice that Tony and the Fantastic Four decided to make as they flew directly into Onslaught's psionic body, ending their universe and kickstarting the highly controversial Heroes Reborn storyline. Coming in at number 4, we have the time Tony Stark intentionally stopped his own heart to save his life, because the logic behind that totally makes sense. Tony's had his fair share of bad relationships over the years, but few have ended as poorly as his romance with Kathleen Dare, a woman who took Tony's playboy ways incredibly personally and would eventually get back at Tony by shooting him in the chest. Paralyzed from this attack and suffering from severe nerve damage, Tony decided to stop his own heart so that he'd be placed into cryostasis until a solution could be found to his nerve damage. Unfortunately, Tony didn't tell many people what his plan was, causing many of his friends to believe he had died for good. Not great communication skills there, Iron Man. Not great. Coming in at number 3, we have one of the most controversial Avengers storylines with the time Tony Stark replaced himself with a younger Tony. In the event known as The Crossing, a variant of the time-traveling villain, Kang the Conqueror, known as Immortus, began using the neural link in the Iron Man suit to secretly begin altering Tony Stark's brainwaves throughout time. Over time, Tony's morals were slowly eroded until he was an active threat to the rest of the Avengers team, a sleeper agent for Kang the Conqueror. While his teammates would try and return him to the side of good, they eventually were forced to ally themselves with a younger Tony Stark from the past, and permanently defeat the corrupted, older Iron Man. And while eventually this younger Tony would get retconned into being the true Tony Stark all along, this is still an intense example of just how dangerous Iron Man could be if he ever broke bad. Coming in at number 2, we have the time Iron Man and Captain America fought at the end of all existence. No, I'm not talking about the Civil War event, but rather a larger battle between the former friends during an event that saw the Marvel Multiverse beginning to collapse in on itself during a storyline known as the Incursion. With both the Marvel and Ultimate Universes destroying one another as they collided, Cap was shocked to learn that Tony had known about this imminent destruction for years, and had been secretly trying to prevent it with the Illuminati rather than letting the rest of the Avengers know. This betrayal meant that Iron Man and Captain America spent their last moments in this universe punching one another, before eventually reality was reset into a new battle world. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the time that Iron Man got decapitated by the partner of Thanos. The battle for the Infinity Gauntlet in the MCU might not have ended with Tony Stark's survival either, but at least in the movies, Tony got to be reassured that they won first. In the comic books, Iron Man has a lot less to do with Thanos' eventual defeat, as during the final battle against Thanos, he's apparently killed off-panel by the recently created partner of Thanos, Terraxia, offering the torn-off head of the Iron Man armor to Thanos as a romantic gift. And while Tony would be restored to life once Thanos was defeated and all of his evils undone, it's still wild just how thoroughly he was beaten by the partner of the Mad Titan.
Number 10, drowning. We talked about Wolverine's battle with Tiger Shark on part 1 of this list, but later on in that same series, there's also a time when Wolverine/Patch seems to have been adrift in the ocean for quite some time and washes up later on shore alive. This almost implies that if you take Wolverine out of the water, he could potentially recover from drowning. So you could really only kill him by drowning if you kept him under there. Either that or he managed to stay afloat long enough to keep his brain alive before passing out, getting tossed around some more, and then washing up on shore later. So perhaps he's only been passed out for a few minutes. It seems as though he has suffered some brain damage, at least from this underwater journey, as Logan also suffers from amnesia when he first wakes up. It takes a bullet to the head to loosen his memories and make him remember why he came there in the first place. Unfortunately, by then, it's a little too late. His plan was to warn the people of the village he arrived at, but by then they were already under attack. To read this whole story and the account of his drowning and washing up ashore, you need to check out the Lazarus Project story arc from the 1988 series. Near the end of issue 27 is where he dives into the water, and then we see him wash up without his memory in issue 28. Number 9, stabbed too fast. Technically, this killed Wolverine, but in the same issue in which he died, he was right back up and at him again. So I think we can still count it as a survival moment because he recovers. He did come back from it and ultimately he did survive. Also, this death is pretty ridiculous, which is also why I feel like it needs to be mentioned. In issue number 20 of the 2003 Wolverine series, during the Enemy of the State story arc, in the same issue in which he was introduced, Gorgon kills Wolverine by stabbing him real fast. He stabs so fast, Wolverine's healing factor can't even keep up. Okay. Wolverine dies, but in the same issue is resurrected and returns, now an agent of Hydra. And of course, welcome to Enemy of the State, an iconic story, but one with kind of a weird start. And friends, before I move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Wolverine lists, boy oh boy do I want to give them to you. In fact, I think we could even do a part 3 of just ridiculous things that Wolverine has survived. So let us know you love it by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, attempted decapitation. There was a time when Wolverine was nearly decapitated by Conan the Barbarian himself and still managed to keep on walking. His near decapitation broke a sword and then of course was later covered by his hand on the back of his neck, for censorship reasons I imagine, so you can't quite see it, but it did happen. And this did happen in a what if, so it's considered alternate reality, I should mention, but I still think it's pretty impressive and wild that Wolverine tussled with Conan, got dealt the brunt of his decapitative force, and managed to survive it. And just get back up like it was nothing. Also, I feel like Conan would know when he's pretty much decapitated someone, because I feel like he probably does that a lot, so he literally was like, I gave him the whole decapitation swing and I don't know, he's probably dead. Number 7, weaponized healing factor. When facing the Omegas in the 2010 Uncanny X-Force series in issue 26, Wolverine had his whole healing factor turn against him, being weaponized by Omega Red with Omega Blue and Omega Black in tow. The Omegas. Omega Red basically makes it so that Wolverine's immune system is working on overdrive, basically being tricked into thinking that his whole body is like a disease that needs to be fought off, so his immune system starts attacking all his organs, oh no. As a result, he becomes a giant mass of pus, decay, and inflammation. Wolverine's heart struggles against the internal attack, and in the end, his only solution to surviving is to cut himself open and basically let all the infectious bits that are there internally fall out of him. It's quite grotesque, but it does seem to work. And of course, he does survive. Just like him being like, I guess I gotta just cut myself open. I'm like, oh, okay. Alrighty then. Gross. Number 6. Actual decapitation. In Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, issue number 5, Wolverine ends up getting full-on decapitated by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury. This, of course, is in the Ultimate Universe, as it is an Ultimate comic. So it isn't 616 Wolverine, but it's still Wolverine. Wolverine of 1610, but still. Fury tells Wolverine that they are holding his body in an undisclosed location, and reveals that they ran some experiments on Wolverine's head and body, and have learned that his mutation seems to be more about survival than healing. How is he able to breathe without a body as a decapitated head? Apparently, his head has adapted to use his skin to breathe instead. So Ultimate Wolverine can actually survive decapitation and a slew of other things, just no problemo. He could survive almost anything in the Ultimate reality. Almost anything. Still dies in that reality, so you know.
Coming in at number 5, we have the time Peter Parker became a literal spider monster. We've already covered a storyline on this list where Peter grew some extra limbs, but during an event in which the concept of the spider totems was first introduced into the Marvel mythology, Peter Parker found himself transformed into a gigantic spider-human hybrid, with horrifying mandibles and a hunger for human flesh. Eventually, this creature would appear to die and then be reborn as a fresh Peter Parker, now possessing organic web shooters. While this may have just been a really convoluted storyline to make Spidey's web status the same as the Tobey Maguire movies, it's still a body horror storyline that makes my skin crawl. Coming in at number 4, we have the time that Spider-Man lifted an entire building and lived to tell the tale. In one of the most iconic, defining moments for the entire character, Spider-Man found himself trapped under the rubble of a collapsed building, with water rapidly filling the area as well. In order to save the life of his Aunt May, Peter had to lift the weight of the entire building off of his back. This is the pivotal moment where Spider-Man showed just how strong he could be when the situation called for it, and just how far he was willing to push his body to save the lives of the people he loves. Something that would go on to become a defining feature of the character. But seriously, Peter, you should probably get someone to spot you the next time you lift something that heavy. Coming in at number 3, we have the time that Deadpool accidentally killed and then resurrected Spider-Man twice. After a complicated series of events led to Deadpool being hired to kill his friend Spider-Man, and being convinced that Peter had turned to evil, the Merc with a Mouth shot Peter Parker in the head unexpectedly at his apartment. This would be a pretty anticlimactic end to the Spectacular Spider-Man, however, and Deadpool eventually convinced his demon girlfriend of the time to resurrect his buddy, because comic books are weird like that. In a comedic twist, Deadpool would shoot Peter again after briefly thinking that he had once more turned to evil, but eventually everyone wound up alive and safe, even if this would continue to be one of the weirdest situations in Spider-Man's very weird history. Coming in at number 2, we have the so-called death of the Ultimate Spider-Man. In the comic book event that would lead to the debut of Miles Morales, the Peter Parker of the Ultimate Marvel Universe had to die before a new Spider-Man could rise. In a final battle against his nemesis, the Green Goblin, the teenage Peter Parker protected his family against Norman Osborn's relentless and crazed attacks, even after he'd already been mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet. While at the time this seemed like a tragic and dramatic end to the Ultimate Peter Parker, it would eventually be revealed that he actually survived this intense battle, as the Oz formula that gave him his spider abilities also functionally made this Peter Parker immortal. Maybe it's just a weird comic book retcon, but the fact that Peter survived so many injuries is truly mind-blowing, and I can't wait to see where the Ultimate Universe takes us next. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have Spider-Man's head-crushing defeat in the original Infinity Gauntlet event. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we may have all gotten our hearts broken by that classic, "I don't want to go, Mr. Stark," but the battle for the Infinity Gauntlet in the comics may have been even more brutal to Peter Parker than we'd ever want to see on the big screen. In the comics, Peter is able to briefly get the upper hand on Thanos with some web attacks to the face, but is then viciously beaten by Thanos' lady companion, Taraxia, who is shown to kill the wall crawler by attacking him with a rock. Pretty brutal for a Cosmic Marvel event. And while by the end of Infinity Gauntlet all of the killed heroes would be restored, this might just be one of the most bone-crushing losses ever suffered by Spider-Man.
Number 10, buried alive. One of the worst ways to go would obviously be to be buried alive. Not only that, but it would be near impossible to escape were this to happen to you. Then again, that wasn't the case for Batman. And he didn't just wake up in a coffin, but he was also strapped into a straitjacket as well. The even more crazy part of this story is the villain who managed to pull off trapping Batman here was kinda just a dude. Not any of his big A-list villains or anything like that, just a guy with ingenuity named Ed Wiley. While Wiley wouldn't survive the story, Batman would make it out alive. As Superman races against the clock to find and save Batman, by the time he gets there and digs up the coffin that Batman was buried in, Batman has already escaped and is actually standing right behind him. I know it's Batman, but this is all still pretty impressive and insane. Number 9, joining a club. This doesn't sound like an epic death, and I guess it's not really, but it is a really ridiculous one, hence why it's included here. And so, here we go. This one comes from the classic Batman stories of old. In issue 72 of Batman, Bruce hears tell of a new and exclusive club, and so of course has to be a member. The club is so exclusive because in order to join you need to have basically cheated death. Without much hesitation, Bruce scarfs down a poison which will kill him with the plan to be revived by a doctor, but making it look like the whole thing just happened accidentally. Oh my goodness, I just accidentally ate this poison. The rest of the issue involves him trying to protect his newfound friends of the Death Cheaters Club from a criminal who is denied entry and seeks revenge. Because comics. Also though, I feel like if you wanted to be part of this club and you didn't get in, it's kind of a weird club anyways, so I don't know why you'd be upset, but okay. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about more death-defying Batman moments, you know there are a lot more, then be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Cave-In. At the end of Batman Endgame, both Batman and Joker seemingly die. The two of them are crushed to death, or so it is implied, by a cave-in. In reality, they are saved and healed by basically magic science water, referred to as Dionysium. Dionysium has healing properties which allow both the Joker and Batman to survive and be completely removed and healed of their injuries. Unfortunately, they also both seemingly lose their memories as well, effectively giving them a sort of kinda like weird reset. Gotta love when good old magic science water that is connected to the dark multiverse and just happens to be below Gotham saves you. This whole resurrection would also be the spark that would initiate all of the Dark Knight's metal stuff and everything that came after that. Also, if you think Dionysium looks similar to the Lazarus Pits, that's because it's believed to be an ingredient for those immortal and maddening pits. Number 7, Neutron Bomb Explosion. This one comes from Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight franchise. At the end of Dark Knight Rises, Batman seemingly sacrifices himself to save Gotham, moving a giant bomb outside of the city. Initially, they actually hoped to stabilize this bomb, which was made from a fusion reactor core. Unfortunately, that was not in the cards because Talia al Ghul destroys the only chamber in Gotham that they could have used to do so in time. Instead, Batman is forced to therefore fly the bomb out of the city over the water. He gets it far enough away that no one is harmed, other than probably some fish and marine life likely. Guess we just don't care about dropping bombs in the ocean. Aquaman, if he was there, would be like, stop that. The other person that's possibly injured here, of course, is Batman himself, who is implied to be within the craft, or at the very least within the vicinity to have piloted it. In reality, Batman miraculously survives the explosion and is living happily later with Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman. The two are living abroad for a while and laying low. We never learn how Batman manages to pull this one off though, so I guess he's bomb-proof. I don't know how you get out of that. I mean, he could have, the one thing I was thinking is I was like, he could have ejected himself out of the craft at some point. I feel like you'd have to be far away. So I have questions, but I don't have answers for you, I'm sorry. Number 6, buried alive again. In this case, Batman was buried alive during the events of the Batman R.I.P. story arc. Here he seemed to be double-crossed by his lover, Jezebel Jet, who it turned out was actually a secret member of the Black Glove, as well as one of its former victims. Batman ends up captured by the criminal organization and is buried alive by them, but appears to escape with ease. Although, at least, as he tells it this time, there is nothing easy about escaping a death trap, as deadly as being buried alive. Batman here describes just how improbable and challenging that feat is, but proves that for him, it of course is not impossible. Which really shouldn't surprise us at this point because, well, I mean, he's already proven to be an expert in the matter of this kind of escape before. He's also like a master escape artist, I guess. Still, he gets buried alive a lot. At this point, people should really learn, you know, that's not gonna work for you. Though really the most amazing feat for me of Batman RIP is that Bruce apparently suspected for some time that Jezebel wasn't what she seemed to be and had figured out that she was part of the trap before it all came to pass. My question is, I feel like if Bruce is claiming he knew this like from like almost day one, why did this even happen? How did this even get to this point? Alright, you know what, you're Batman, so I'm just gonna be like, okay, Batman, you got it. Batman knows everything. Number 5, drowning. While this might not sound that crazy on paper in regards to everything else on this list, for Wolverine it is. It's been heavily suggested throughout history that water is not really where Wolverine is in his element. This has to do with the fact that Wolverine is actually quite heavy with all that added adamantium weight. I believe before he said it's over like 100 pounds of extra weight. He also can't really fully heal from fully drowning. Eventually, it's believed that it would kill him. And he's come pretty close to death by being stuck underwater for prolonged periods of time, which is pretty crazy considering drowning his own son, Daken, in a puddle was the way that he defeated him when the two were forced to fight one another. One time, Wolverine seemingly drowned during an underwater fight with Tiger Shark when his claws got stuck in a coral reef. Fortunately, we learned in issue 20 of the 1988 Wolverine series that he managed to escape and only suffered from briefly being deaf after escaping the coral and returning to land. Wolverine has also fallen into oceans and washed up on foreign shores a few times and lived to tell that tale, or those tales, although there are times when that experience seems to mess with his memories as opposed to his hearing. In fact, I'm trying to think of another time that he's drowned and his hearing has been messed up, but I mean, that definitely makes sense if you're deep underwater, because that would mess your hearing up. How come that never comes up again? Does it come up again? I don't know. Let me know if it does. Let me know what issue I need to read where that comes up again, because that would be cool. Number 4, steamrolled. Instead of being rickrolled, he got steamrolled. During a team up with the Punisher gone wrong, Wolverine managed to survive a whole no-holds-barred fight with Frank Castle. Well, definitely no holds barred from Castle's side anyways. The Punisher shot Wolverine repeatedly with an Uzi, kneecapping him as well, and then for good measure, he also decided to just run him over with a steamroller, just to really make sure, you know, Wolverine wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. The whole fight is brutal and really only starts because Punisher sees the opportunity to use Wolverine as a weapon, so he kinda like pokes him in places where he knows he's gonna start to rage. Which, you know, I mean, Wolverine loves when people do that. He loves when people annoy him so that he can go into a berserker rage and be used as a weapon. That's his favorite thing. The fight all went down during the days of the Marvel Knights in Punisher issue number 17 from his 2001 series, which of course was written by none other than Garth Ennis. Because, I mean, come on, this whole fight, it definitely sounds like Ennis. Oh, poor Wolverine. Number 3, forced adamantium removal. One of the craziest moments possibly in all of Marvel Comics has to be when Wolverine had his adamantium forcefully removed from his body by Magneto. His adamantium isn't just like a jacket for his skeleton, by the way. It's like literally fully bonded to Wolverine's skeleton and his body. And while Wolverine does have a healing factor, he still feels all the pain of his injuries. All the pain. The healing factor doesn't diminish any of that pain. So I cannot even imagine just how painful this whole experience would have been for Logan. The experience was actually so traumatic that it also seemed to turn Wolverine feral for a good amount of time in the comics, and he even seemed to lose his nose as a casualty. Well, either the loss of the adamantium was what made him feral and made him lose his nose, or the experience did, or some combination thereof. But either way, it was clearly very traumatic for him. Number 2, reduced to a skeleton. This all went down in Wolverine's tie-in issues for Civil War. In issue number 43 of the 2003 Wolverine series, Logan squares off with Nitro, the one responsible for killing almost all of the New Warriors as well as hundreds of civilians. Nitro's superpower makes him basically a living bomb, and it's this explosive power that he uses on Wolverine. The strength and heat of the explosion is so strong that it reduced Wolverine to just a skeleton, and yet within a few brief moments, I kid you not, Wolverine Wolverine has almost completely regenerated and somehow healed, with flames still visible, licking at his back, and while he is still smoking from that explosion. That's bananas. Though of course this was the early 2000s, a time when Wolverine was pretty overpowered in the comics due to him being so crazy popular, so this was like peak healing factor times. All he needs is a few pages and he's like, I'm better. I'm like basically fully healed almost. Number 1, encased in liquid adamantium. Wolverine did actually die in the comics during the Death of Wolverine story. Sort of. But it ended up of course not being permanent, and eventually his corpse disappeared, and then once more Wolverine showed up again, back alive. However, this was a pretty good attempt at finally burying Wolverine from a writing standpoint. Or I guess less burying him, more turning his corpse into like kind of a morbid Wolverine monument. During the Death of Wolverine arc, we saw Wolverine's healing factor begin to dissipate and fail him as Wolverine learned that there seemed to be someone who wanted him dead. In truth, it was the head of the Weapon X program who sought Wolverine to try and duplicate his healing factor. He was trying to, you know, do more adamantium bonding. When he learns that Wolverine no longer has his healing factor, the two end up in a fight against one another. As the founder of Weapon X, Dr. Cornelius attempts to escape by activating the adamantium bonding process on 3 remaining test subjects. Wolverine puts a stop to the process by breaking open the containers. However, this results in him getting covered in molten liquid adamantium, which ultimately encases, hardens, and then suffocates Logan to death. But then of course, Wolverine is later resurrected, regains his healing factor, and ultimately he returns again. So that's how he's alive now. Yay.
Coming in at number 10, we have the time that Tony Stark faked his own death in order to keep his secret identity safe. During the Armor Wars event, which saw Iron Man trying to destroy all of the Stark Industries technology he had sold over the years, the iconic Avenger was put on the world's most wanted list for interfering with multiple nations' militaries. Since Tony Stark's alibi at the time was that Iron Man was actually his bodyguard, Tony had a fake biography and confession note written for a fictional man named Randall Pierce, and then faked this made-up bodyguard's death so that the Iron Man secret could be kept. Definitely an odd way to end an Iron Man crossover event, especially considering how public Tony would be with his secret identity just a few years down the road. Coming in at number 9, we have the time that Tony Stark erased his entire brain just to thwart Norman Osborn. Following an action-packed few years in the Marvel Universe that saw both Civil War and the Skrull invasion, the former Green Goblin had become the head of a new team of Dark Avengers. To protect all of the superheroes he had exposed during Civil War, Tony deleted all of the superhuman identities from the Superhero Registration Act, and implanted the data within a hard drive in his brain, making him Osborn's #1 target. To prevent the Green Goblin from gaining all of this knowledge, Tony eventually wiped his entire brain clean, relying on a backup of his brain to restore most of his usual memories once Norman had been safely locked up and taken care of. Coming in at number 8, we have the time that Iron Man was electrocuted by the God of Thunder himself. Tony Stark has made a lot of iffy choices in the comics, but few have been as disastrous as his attempt at a Thor clone. Intended to be a powerful deterrent against Cap's team during the Civil War event, this clone called Ragnarok quickly went out of control and caused the deaths of several heroes. Whenever the true Thor returned, he was furious at what Tony had done with his genetic code and fried every system in the suit of Iron Man armor, leaving Tony to walk back to Avengers HQ, humiliated and defeated, with one of the most decisive superhero smackdowns in comic book history, in a fight that Tony should be grateful he was still capable of walking away from. Coming in at number 7, we have the time that Iron Man flew a nuke through a wormhole. The end of the original Avengers film is one of the defining moments of the MCU, as Earth's mightiest heroes finally team up for the first time to put an end to Loki's Chitauri invasion in New York City. Faced with overwhelming odds, Tony Stark was ready to sacrifice himself by flying a nuclear missile launched by S.H.I.E.L.D., intended to take out the infection in New York, and instead shooting it through the wormhole to the Chitauri mothership. And while Tony would be lucky enough to survive the explosion and fall through the wormhole back to Earth, he would remain traumatized by these events for years to come, suffering from both survivor's guilt and existential terror at just how big the threats from beyond the stars could become. Totally not foreshadowing for Thanos, right? Coming in at number 6, we have the time that Tony got full-on punched by Captain Marvel. Which, honestly, with the amount that Iron Man seems to get into conflict with other superheroes, we're surprised this hasn't happened more often. During the climax of the event Civil War II, neither Tony Stark or Carol Danvers were willing to budge on their positions over the use of a future-seeing Inhuman. And thus, Carol finally unleashed her full power to take Tony out with a single punch. And while at the time it seemed he was just knocked unconscious, it turns out that Carol's punch was so strong that it killed Tony's physical body, with his consciousness having to be backed up and placed inside a cloned replacement. Talk about learning how to handle a punch.
How about doing at number 5, Crisis on Infinite Earths? Technically speaking, the comic version of Barry Allen did survive Crisis on Infinite Earths, despite everyone believing him to be dead at the time, since he returned to the Speed Force after turning into the lightning bolt that ended up giving him his powers to begin with. But after transforming into pure lightning, traveling through time and space, and striking himself, Barry was sent into the Speed Force and then later escapes and comes back into our world in the Flash Rebirth storyline. So technically he survived the comic version of Crisis because he didn't die, he just transcended dimensions, I guess. But he also survived the Crisis from the CW crossover as well, since in this instance, despite like 6 seasons of us seeing a newspaper saying that our Barry vanishes, the Barry Allen from the 90s Flash series, aka Earth 90, was the one who ended up disappearing. Even though we literally saw a newspaper telling us about how our Flash died for 6 years. And no matter what, unless Barry didn't have his speed, that article stayed true. The byline changed, the articles around it changed, but the fact that Barry vanished in Crisis never did as long as he had his speed. So I don't know how he got out of that one. I guess like killing off one main character in that crossover was enough for the CW, but they would have just brought him back again. So like, what's the deal here? In at 4, fought the Speed Force. Speaking of the CW, going from a crisis where every Earth gets destroyed, it's hard to make any other story seem worth it. However, the absolute crazy thing is that in the following season of The Flash, season 7, they upped the stakes by having Barry fight the literal Speed Force. A reborn Speed Force, might I add, since Barry ended up killing it when Oliver Queen as the Spectre brought out its full potential in order to save the multiverse. So, Barry and Iris end up essentially giving birth to another one, but like birth adjacent. But while they were rebirthing the Speed Force, they also created 3 other forces that were all evil for one time or another. And then they get all the other ones on their side, but the Speed Force wants to kill the other forces because she thinks that the other forces are trying to kill her. And the Speed Force looks like Barry's mom again, and then they even start calling her Nora. Honestly, it's a question as to how anyone watching this survived this storyline, let alone Barry fighting the literal thing that gave him his powers that he killed and then rebirthed and then was basically the father of, even though it looked like his mom. Season 7 definitely had some issues, but Barry should honestly not have won against the Speed Force. Getting close to the end, and at number 3, beating teleportation. There was a comic called The Human Race, where a group of cosmic gamblers who existed at the edge of the universe traveled around the cosmos and made bets with each other for fun. They were ultra mega powerful, so this was their only form of entertainment. They picked speedsters throughout the cosmos and then made them race each other in their bets, and then the speedster who lost got his or her home planet destroyed. In one such bet, Earth gets the attention of these cosmic gamblers, so Wally West, the fastest man on this planet, became the representative of Earth. During the race with a fellow speedster in the bet, Wally, who realized that the cosmic gamblers will never refuse a friendly wager, makes a bet with them that he will reach Earth first, despite the fact that the cosmic gamblers can teleport to any location in the cosmos instantly. This appeared to be a ridiculous gambit. The cosmic gamblers agree, and before the race even begins, using the kinetic energy of everyone on Earth and then some, Wally ran at what is called the trans-time velocity, fast enough to beat teleportation, which is basically 23 tridactylion times faster than the speed of light. Yeah, that's 23 with like 20 zeros. Or 30 zeros, something like that. He reasonably should have lost and gotten the whole planet destroyed because there's no way that in hell that would happen. Or he would have just disintegrated while running that fast. If Barry dies during Crisis, he should have died beating teleportation. Penultimately, in at number 2, Armageddon. The most recent episodes of The Flash started off season 8 with the Armageddon crossover, with Barry starting to believe he's going crazy and in the future ends up creating Armageddon, destroying the entire world. However, this turns out not to be the case, since Reverse Flash is actually the one who creates Armageddon by turning himself into the Flash and then causing Barry as Reverse Flash to fix things. In order to fix things though, Barry must run at Mach 20, which is 20 times the speed of sound. But Thawne doing this behind him as well, in order to stop him, ends up tearing the world apart, at least until Barry fixes everything, causing the Reverse Flashpoint to no longer exist. Yeah, this was pretty ridiculous, but also a good story. Some of the best writing we've seen from the show in a while. That Reverse Flashpoint episode was awesome, but I am kind of partial to some alternate timeline episodes where we can see how things could have been, but honestly I'm surprised Barry survived this, and for good reason. Because the episode before he ran back in time, Barry had Jefferson Pierce, Black Lightning, drain him of his speed nearly completely so that he couldn't hurt anyone again. He wanted to do it completely, but Jefferson stopped. But according to Thawne, Barry only had around 5% of his speed left, maybe less. So how could Barry have run at Mach 20? And how could Thawne, if he was truly the Flash in this timeline, not have caught up with him? That seems fairly ridiculous if you ask me. And finally, in at number 1, Black Flash. Black Flash is the Grim Reaper of the Speed Force, making his first appearance in The Flash Volume 2 number 138 in 1998. He was seen before the deaths of several speedsters including Barry Allen, Johnny Quick, and Bart Allen, and in essence making him the speedster embodiment of death. In the CW Arrowverse, he was Hunter Zolomon after being caught by time wraiths, and was killed in Season 3's finale by Killer Frost when Black Flash came for Savitar since the Paradox had finally caught up with him. In the comics, he dies thanks to the combined efforts of multiple speedsters including Jesse Quick, Jay Garrick, and Max Mercury, and while he was able to race Black Flash to the end of time, causing death to have no meaning, which didn't matter for long since Barry Allen then returns in the Flash Rebirth storyline as the new Black Flash, unknowingly, until Professor Zoom takes over the title when his corpse is raised in the Blackest Night storyline. Either way, if this man is supposed to be the representation of death, and what inevitably comes for all speedsters, how was Barry able to outrun him at any point? Or how was anyone able to outrun him? How was Wally able to outrun him? I don't know, okay? It shouldn't have happened.
Coming in at number 10, we have the time Peter grew and then lost 4 additional arms, literally making him an 8-limbed freak. This event took place during a period of time in which being Spider-Man had brought Peter nothing but pain, with Gwen Stacy's father having recently passed away, and Gwen believing Spider-Man to be responsible. Thus, Peter decided to get rid of his double life by developing a serum to remove his spider abilities. Unfortunately, testing serums on yourself rarely works out in the Marvel Universe, and Peter's spider powers are amplified to the point that 4 additional arms burst forth out of his body. And while Spider-Man would eventually be able to balance out his life and lose the additional limbs, it's still a bizarre tale of body horror that Peter is lucky to have gotten out of unscathed. Coming in at number 9, we have getting trampled by the Rhino in the video game Spider-Man Miles Morales. This game is one of my favorites of the last couple years, and it opens with both Peter Parker and Miles Morales working together as Spider-Men to try and transport the Rhino safely to the supervillain prison. Unfortunately, the Rhino breaks free, and the opening tutorial of the game is trying to chase the villain down and stop his rampage. Unfortunately, since this is just the tutorial, Peter Parker does most of the fighting and winds up getting his butt kicked, getting hit with attacks that should definitely have shattered at least half the bones in his body. Luckily, Miles is eventually able to save the day by discovering his Venom Blast ability, but it's still a wonder how Spidey is able to even stand after all of that pummeling. Coming in at number 8, we have Firebrand burning Peter Parker alive. During another period where Spider-Man was a bit off his game, he got into a fight with the usually low-level villain Firebrand. Unfortunately, Spider-Man's taunts during the fight pushed Firebrand over the edge, causing him to fully unleash his power and blow up a city block. The resulting explosion was shown in graphic detail to burn both Peter's costume and his flesh, and the only reason he was able to survive without permanent scarring was due to the quick intervention of a hospital that usually only treats supervillains. I guess one perk of getting most of your face burnt off is that the doctors won't know exactly who they're healing. Nicely handled, Spider-Man. Coming in at number 7, we have the time Spider-Man had to take on the entire Sinister Six at once in the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man video game. After a breakout at the supervillain prison The Raft, Peter is faced with his worst nightmare when he's surrounded by the combined team of the Rhino, the Vulture, Scorpion, Electro, and Mr. Negative, who are more than enough to weaken Spider-Man before the arrival of the leader of the Sinister Six, Dr. Octopus, who up until this point had been a friend and mentor to this universe's Peter Parker. The betrayal cuts Peter deep, and his wounded body is thrown into New York Harbor, only barely surviving by holding on to a floating oil drum. This beatdown was so bad, Peter eventually needed a specialized costume to be strong enough to go up against Doc Ock once more. Coming in at number 6, we have the time that Spider-Man was tortured by the dark ancient sorcerer Kulan Gath. During a comic event that saw the entire city of Manhattan transformed into an alternate medieval fantasy version, Spider-Man was one of the few heroes who remembered the world as it truly was. As punishment for rebelling against Kulan Gath's rule, this version of Spider-Man was tortured and put on display for all of Kulan Gath's enemies to see. And while Spider-Man would eventually be restored once Kulan Gath was defeated and reality reverted back to normal, it's still incredibly disturbing to see one of Marvel's greatest heroes being put in such a violent situation.
Number 5, escape velocity. We've seen Wolverine able to navigate the vacuum and coldness of space without proper equipment and survive pretty reasonably. But how about a hit so hard that it got him up to escape velocity, blasting him into orbit? Well, surprisingly, that wasn't much of a problem for Wolverine either. We see that happen in issue 108 of the first X-Men volume. Here he runs into a little fella named Jaff. But like Wolverine, just because he might be smaller in stature does not mean he is a pushover. Jaff punches Wolverine so hard he launches him up into space, but thanks to his healing factor, he manages to still survive that hard hit. And survive space. I mean, I think it's pretty cool that Wolverine can just survive space. That's nuts. Number 4, fall back from space. I like space, so I'm gonna talk about space some more. In Return of Wolverine issue number 5, Logan goes up against Persephone. Not wanting to be her puppet and not interested in the seeming fresh start she's offering him after bringing him back from the dead, he decides to escape their conversation and finds out what her master plan is. When he learns it has to do with basically mind controlling potentially the whole planet, he decides to intervene. The last satellite to be removed that could allow Persephone to take control of up to a few million people at the time happens to be the station he is on. So he decides the best course of action is to also disable that, bringing it crashing down to Earth. Logan himself had just survived being hit with a poisonous gas and jumping out into the vacuum of space, and even after that, he still manages to survive re-entry on a crashing station that would get impossibly hot, like really hot in there. The station lands in the ocean with Logan literally on fire as he slams into it. As a charred and burnt crisp, he emerges from the water and is fortunately brought to shore by some very shocked but obviously helpful fishermen. Hopefully they did have beer for you, Wolverine. Number 3, launched into the sun. During the dawn of X period of the current modern X-Men books, back in issue number 4 of House of X, Wolverine suffered what would appear to be a very permanent death in the fight against Orchis. A team was assembled to take out the mother mold that Orchis was building up in space, a massive mother mold before it could be completed and come online. Wolverine was the one to deal that final blow to it. Nightcrawler teleported him to outside the station where the mother mold was docked, sacrificing his own life in the process. It was then up to Logan, who slashed through the dock, freeing the mother mold from the station so that he could launch it into the sun. And of course, him with it. In current X times, though, we have resurrection protocols on our side. Yay, resurrection protocols, which allow fallen mutants to be returned to Krakoa. So while Wolverine did die from this, he was soon returned via resurrection protocols back to life. And for those who are wondering, the returning of his adamantium bonded skeleton each time is actually all thanks to Proteus, which fortunately means it's probably a lot less painful than other adamantium bonding processes that Logan has had to suffer through, because Proteus can just be like, I warp reality, now you have adamantium. Of course, he can only do that because that's how Wolverine was before, so he can't just like make adamantium, just to be clear. It's not an adamantium making machine, okay guys? Number 2, adamantium bonding process. On part 1 of this list, we talked about when Wolverine has had the adamantium ripped from his body, and namely his skeleton. But how about just getting the adamantium in the first place? The adamantium bonding process is notoriously dangerous, and there are many test subjects who have come before and after Logan who simply did not survive it. Now, consider that Wolverine hasn't just had the adamantium bonded to his skeleton one time, but actually has had it bonded to him multiple times in his life. Considering how painful and deadly this process is, it's pretty amazing that Wolverine was able to survive this, even with his healing factor, and that he has been through it more than once in his lifetime. He's also gone through the adamantium bonding process before without even emerging with it bonded to him, rejecting said adamantium. That's multiple big ouches, bub. I can't imagine going through it and then just not even having adamantium at the end of that. That would suck. Number 1, burned up by the sun. Yep, the sun death has happened more than once, but the sun is pretty ultimate, so I felt like I had to talk about it again. I mean, it is a very permanent way to kill Wolverine when you think about it. In New X-Men issue 148, Wolverine has a moment where he's finally ready to say goodbye to everything. He prepares to throw himself into the sun with Jean Grey's body in tow. This is after Jean and Wolverine cannot find a way out of the trap that they've fallen into and are basically about to be launched into the sun. They do their best to find a way out of this predicament, but unfortunately, they can't seem to escape, and it's just getting hotter and hotter in there. When they both seem resigned to their fate, Logan decides to try and make the experience less painful for Jean by running her through with his claws, because that's what Wolverine does. Then, holding her body, he greets the sun as they arrive at their final destination. However, in issue 150 of New X-Men, it's revealed that Wolverine and Jean actually survived this, because the Phoenix consciousness was awoken by Jean's death. She actually needed to die in order to tap into the Phoenix Force and resurrect, rising from the ashes quite literally. She was able to res Logan again and create and pilot a ship construct in order to bring them back to Earth. So he even survived walking into the sun. That's bananas. Gotta love all those reses just saving your butt. Number 10, experimented on in Ravencroft. At one point, Sabretooth managed to capture Wolverine and handed him over to Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister, who tormented him and also used him for experimentation. Wolverine would get out of this one by earning the sympathy of a fellow doctor who it turns out was actually a werewolf. She would help Wolverine to get free, but ultimately end up being caught by Victor Creed and Dr. Essex herself, who would then take her in Logan's place to experiment on. Poor doctor. Logan's time at Ravencroft was so bad that Victor was actually fine with not tormenting Wolverine himself, instead being content with the terrible experiments that Essex had dreamed up for Logan, believing that what he was doing was even worse than anything Victor himself could come up with. You can check out this horror story in the pages of Ruins of Ravencroft, Sabretooth. Number 9, torn in half. It's important to note that Wolverine made his first appearance in a Hulk comic. As such, it shouldn't be surprising that these two have duked it out on more than one occasion, with Wolverine's healing factor generally being put to the test against Hulk's immense strength. In the Ultimate Universe, Wolverine isn't actually believed to have a healing factor either. More, his powers are believed to be tied to increased chances of survival and kinda evolution. In other words, it's believed that his body actually adapts to the duress it is currently under, and finds a way to just, make things work till he can recover. In the case of Ultimate Hulk vs. Wolverine, where Wolverine was torn in half in that first issue by the Ultimate version of the Hulk, in the first few pages in fact, Ultimate Wolverine then was forced to crawl around, looking for the bottom half of his torso so that he could reattach it. Yeah, a lot more gross than what we might see in the pages of a 616 Wolverine vs. Hulk comic. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about more crazy stuff that Wolverine has survived, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Adamantium Poisoning. What's pretty crazy is that Logan is actually battling this pretty much all the time. The adamantium that is bonded to his skeleton is actually slowly killing him, and the only thing that manages to keep him alive is his healing factor. In the Old Man Logan universe, his healing factor gets weaker with time, and eventually he begins to be poisoned to death by his own body. While he does ultimately die, it's pretty crazy to think about just how long he managed to live. And even when Old Man Logan seems to be dying in the Dead Man Logan series, he still finds a way to keep going through a lot of that with the Regenix drug. Of course, it turns out that the side effects of Regenix are also kinda lethal, and eventually Logan does run out of it, using up his last vial. So in the end, Old Man Logan just decides to give in and succumb to death. Still, he had a pretty insane run. Number 7. Devoured by the Hulk. The Old Man Logan universe is much darker than what we're used to, being set in a post-apocalyptic future where the villains actually all pretty much won against the heroes and then turned the world into kind of a wasteland. Logan is just trying to get by and no longer goes by Wolverine here. He manages to find some happiness though, settling down with a woman named Maureen and starting a family. Unfortunately, they happen to live on land that ends up in Hulk gang territory. You might think, wait, isn't Hulk a hero? Isn't this a good thing? Not here, he isn't a hero, and it definitely is not a good thing. The gamma radiation in his old age basically turns Bruce Banner insane. When Old Man Logan doesn't arrive early enough for the Hulk gang with the rent money that they believe his family owes them, they pretty much kill them all. Well, except for Logan, sadly. As a result, Logan seeks revenge on the Hulk. During their fight, Hulk eats Logan, but in the end, Logan wins, giving Hulk some really bad indigestion when he cuts his way out of his gut. Number 6. Shot in the head. I can give you at least 5 separate occasions where this has actually happened in the comics, but honestly, there are definitely many more than that, I am sure. At this point, there may have even been too many to count. I could probably make a top 10 list of just the times that this happened by itself. One of the times this happened though was when Wolverine had been possessed by the Muramasa Blade, or the Ebony Blade, while under the guise of Patch. He ended up capturing Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, which left Patch's friends to try and recover Jess and save Logan from this evil influence. Lindsay McCabe, Jessica Drew's and Patch's good friend at the time, was the one who ended up forced to shoot Patch in the head, and she seemed pretty confused when Patch managed to mysteriously recover, because she could have sworn that, she shot him in the head. Of course, we'd later learn that Patch wasn't really fooling anyone, trying to pretend that he wasn't Wolverine because, all the X-Men were supposed to be dead at that point. So either Lindsay didn't know this yet, or was simply playing dumb to help Logan feel more confident in his disguise. To watch Lindsay wrestle with whether or not to shoot, you can check out the first arc of the 1988 Wolverine series, with Lindsay taking said kill shot in issue number 3. And I know I wrote 89, but it's actually 88. I always get that confused. 89 is the miniseries, even though that's volume 1, but it's 89, so 88, but that's volume 2. It's a little confusing, is it not? Number 5. The Wrath of the SRA. Spider-Man not only impressively survived unmasking for his pal Tony Stark during the events of Civil War, but he also managed to survive betraying Tony as well. When Spider-Man got a good look at the camp Stark's side of the war were running, he realized that he had made the wrong choice, and attempted to walk out. Iron Man, however, isn't ready to let Peter go, and attempts to stop him. He tries to tell S.H.I.E.L.D. to just bring Spider-Man in quietly, as all Tony wants to do is talk to him. He doesn't want to fight, but S.H.I.E.L.D., under the Superhuman Registration Act, denies Stark's request and attempts to have Spider-Man apprehended and arrested, sending the top secret Thunderbolts team that they have amassed after Spider-Man. They send Jack-O-Lantern and Jester the Third, and if it weren't for the interference of Punisher, he may have ended up dead at their hands. Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. was ready to rein in their team members when it came to how much force they were using, but still, real. They already kind of almost killed Spider-Man at that point, putting him in critical condition by the time Punisher showed up to save him. You can see the fight and the shape that Peter is in by the end of it in issue number 5 of the first Civil War series. Number 4. Beat Down by Morlun. During the story The Other, Peter seemed to be suffering from and ultimately dying of a mysterious illness. While struggling with this, Morlun decided to pay Spider-Man a visit just to basically torment him. Focused on his potential impending death, Spider-Man is caught unawares when Morlun attacks him while he's swinging around the city attempting to clear his mind. The two have an insanely explosive fight, but just as Peter thinks he has the upper hand, Morlun brutally defeats him. He plucks out Spider-Man's eye and eats it, and then beats him to within an inch of his life. Spider-Man manages to survive this attack despite him losing an eye and being beaten to a pulp by Morlun. Number 3. Killed by Kraven. In reality, Kraven never really killed Peter, although we were meant to believe that he had killed Spider-Man. I mean, it definitely looked like he had killed Spider-Man. Kraven at one point sets out in Kraven's last hunt to beat Spider-Man by replacing him and proving that he is better than Spider-Man is. However, in the end, he begins to question if he's truly beaten Spider-Man, and who actually makes a better Spider. He realizes that there is no one quite like Peter Parker when it comes to being Spider-Man, just as Spider-Man himself seemingly returns from the dead. In truth, Kraven had merely administered a drug that had made Peter seem dead, probably slowing his heart rate, definitely making him trip out, and putting him in a stasis for a few weeks. Spider-Man, however, was buried alive by Kraven and wakes up in his grave. Pretty sure he was also shot point blank by Kraven, but anyways. Spider-Man then has to dig his way out and find his way back to the villain for that final confrontation. The story ends with Kraven taking his own life, believing he had finally accomplished everything in his life that he had set out to do. But don't worry, Kraven would come back, because Kraven. Number 2. Body Failure. Another time that Peter Parker died, it was actually as Dr. Otto Octavius. During the time of Superior Spider-Man, Otto got a hold of Peter's body by tricking him into a body swap. With Peter's consciousness stuck in Otto's old failing body, when it died, so seemingly did Spider-Man. I mean, we still had Peter's body, but for now, Otto was the one behind the steering wheel. Fortunately, while Peter did kind of die, he also managed to survive, as Otto was unable to wipe Peter's complete consciousness clean from his own body, and his subconscious kinda lingered there. In the end, Otto gave up his own hold over Spider-Man's body in order to let Peter Parker reclaim his body and his mantle once more. Otto was compelled to do this when he realized that even with all that he had done, he could never truly be a better Spider-Man than Peter, because he was kind of missing the moral compass, which was part of what truly made Peter Parker superior. Also, he needed Peter's help, because he was like, I'm trying to save the woman I love and it's like impossible, please. I need the real Spider-Man, help. Number 1. Annihilation of his universe. Miles Morales didn't just survive the death or a bad beatdown, but actually managed to survive the destruction of his entire universe. Following the events of Secret Wars and the creation and dissolution of Emperor Doom's Battleworld, Miles Morales somehow managed to survive after his entire reality of Earth 1610 was pretty much completely destroyed. How? Well, Miles Morales' Spider-Man managed to earn a new life for his family and himself on the reinstated reality of Earth 616, all because of an act of kindness in combination with a weird quirk. Molecule Man had been asking for a snack, and Miles happened to have a burger in the pocket of his suit, which he gave him. As a result, Molecule Man decided to make sure when the universe was recreated, using his powers, that Miles and his family had a place in it. How nice. He also gave Miles' uncle Aaron Davis a new lease on life in the Earth 616 reality as well. Pretty sure he also brought his mom back to life too. Earth 1610 has returned since its destruction, and one of its other survivors, the Maker, even managed to return to it, but at the time, it wasn't around. So, still pretty cool that Miles survived that. Number 10. 28 opponents in 28 hours. During Scott Snyder's run on Batman, we also got to take a look back at Batman's past and his time training prior to being the beast of a man and hero that he is today. One such flashback saw a younger Bruce Wayne take on 28 opponents over the course of 28 hours. During a trial in Norway when he was just 24 years of age, Bruce refused to kill his opponents, so each hour a new one was added to the ring, or the pit, I guess. The hope was to get him to accept the fact that he would have to kill kill. Even when completely exhausted and in the face of potential defeat, Bruce refused. As a result, he still managed to be the victor in the end, because when more men were needed to continue the fight, they refused to enter the pit he was in and fight him. They were just too scared. Number 9. Broken skull. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Batman has broken every bone in his body. So it's not surprising that one of those bones happens to be in his skull. He was actually really lucky too. He only suffered a linear cranial fracture after a fight with Dr. Death during Scott Snyder's 0 Year story arc in issue 26 of the 2011 Batman series. Dr. Death knew a lot about bones and used his super strength and knowledge to try at one point to basically pull apart Bruce Wayne's skull. As he wrapped his hands around Bruce's head and proceeded to squeeze and pull, younger Bruce was saved by the appearance of Jim Gordon, who shot Dr. Death and successfully scared him off. While I'm sure Bruce Wayne here was only a few moments away from having his skull completely crushed or disassembled, he instead gets off with just a fracture. Still, a fracture is a break in the bone, so technically his skull was still at least slightly broken. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, I mean, Batman has survived a lot of crazy stuff because plot armor, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, broken back. Breaking your back is a very severe injury, but not if you're Batman, and if you happen to know superpowered healers who can help speed along your recovery a bit. For this classic moment, you need to visit the story arc known as Batman Nightfall. A lot of people are amazed at Bruce's survival as a hero from his devastating defeat at the hands of Bane, who, yes, broke Batman's back over his knee. But in all honesty, if you have a spinal fracture, you can actually recover from that. Although the amount of time, treatment, and surgery needed to do so all depends on how severe that spinal fracture is. Bruce himself, even with all his money, was still out of commission for months while he had Azrael take over for him as he focused on his own recovery. Eventually, he would recover and return. Not only that, but it seems as though this is an injury that doesn't often even resurface frequently, nor cause any kind of limitation on his ability to fight as Batman. Now, that is amazing. Number 7, leap of faith. Bruce's final act during his time of training was to base jump off of the top of Wayne Tower. Yeah, it was pretty intense, and I imagine a frightening final lesson. Bruce had experience training in base jumping before, but even then, his first attempt in Gotham at doing so, didn't go so well. In the first story in New Talent Showcase 2018, titled Batman Leap of Faith, we learned that Bruce did not land so smoothly from that jump and ended up with a dislocated elbow and a dislocated shoulder, a concussion, and some road rash. All in all though, he got off pretty easy. I'm just surprised he even managed to survive that. It's funny, but while I can't imagine Batman jumping off of Wayne Tower as like an established hero and full-grown adult, I cannot imagine anyone surviving that first jump, including like young Batman. I feel like that would be crazy. But I guess, how can you ever take more jumps without having first made it through your very first jump? Number 6, gas tank explosion. This one comes from the Batman animated series, from a really awesome episode too, The Man Who Killed Batman, episode 51 of the animated series. Here, Sid the Squid appeared to be the man who accidentally became responsible for Batman's death. During a scuffle, Sid falls over a roof ledge, and Batman reaches out to help him back up. However, part of the ledge then gives way and dings a propane gas tank which lays below, damaging it. As Batman pulls Sid up, he himself seems to lose his balance and falls down toward the tank just as it explodes, leaving only a tattered piece of his cape behind. While the explosion is large and deadly enough that it seems though no one would be able to survive, we later learn that Batman somehow swung to safety and faked his own death as part of his own plan to solve a crime. Number 5, Jean's planetary-sized stroke. Sometimes I think about some of the things happening in the Krakoa era, and when I remember all the history of these characters, it blows my mind. Like when, for example, during Grant Morrison's new X-Men run in issue 150, Magneto was revealed to be Zorn, although thankfully we'd actually get an entirely different Zorn later on, and Magneto here used an electromagnetic pulse to give Jean Grey, who at the time had the power of the Phoenix Force, a quote, planetary scale stroke. End quote. What that means, I still don't really know. What is that? This all went down at a moment too when Jean was actually winning the fight, but was used as a method for Magneto to basically turn the tables on her. Jean would end up dying in this battle, even though the idea of beating the Phoenix in this way just seems, pretty ridiculous to me. This is the Phoenix we're talking about, who can control, manipulate, and even create matter at an atomic level, who also prior to this was stabbed through by Wolverine, which she not only survived, but this actually unleashed her power, her latent Phoenix abilities. And yet somehow, after all that, she ends up killed by a stroke. Well, I mean, I guess it's not any stroke. It is a planetary scale one, but still. Also, what does that even mean? It's so comics. And now it's really weird to think that like Jean and Magneto were friendly up until his death. That's pretty crazy. Number 4, Batwoman goes out with a whimper. For this point, we are not talking about Kate Kane, Batman's cousin and the current Batwoman over at DC Comics. We're talking instead about the first Batwoman, Kathy Kane. Although she does sound like she would be the same person based on, well, I mean, both of her names. This version of the character, however, was actually not related to Batman and was even a bit of a love interest for him, as well as a female crime-fighting partner. However, apparently neither her skills nor her connection and long-standing relationship with the Caped Crusader would protect her from getting unceremoniously fridged. Long before the term was ever coined, I believe, in issue number 485, more than 250 issues after her first appearance, she was killed, get this, off-panel, when Batman was knocked out. The League of Assassins had come for Kathy and Batman was unable to stop them. While he was knocked unconscious, she was killed, and of course we don't get to see any of that because he was knocked out and we're following his narrative, not hers. So with her death really only served as well to give Batman motivation to go after the League of Assassins, so there's also that point. Very unfortunate. Number 3, Green Lantern sees yellow. Yep, what a ridiculous way to defeat Green Lantern, but this was the approach that was taken in Frank Miller's Batverse. In All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder issue number 9, Batman is confronted by Green Lantern, Hal Jordan. In this reality, Batman is not yet part of the Justice League, and Green Lantern doesn't like the way that Batman is operating. He's one of the people who is kind of more against offering Batman a place on the team, but he did think he could be redeemed. After all, Batman is still a hero, but it's his methods that Hal and many of the other team members take issue with, which is why Hal came to talk to him about that. However, this talk did not go so well. Green Lantern meets Batman and Robin in one of Batman's safe houses, which has all been completely painted yellow, right down to Batman and Robin's face and suits. Robin even eats yellow ice cream while Batman drinks yellow lemonade. It's like overkill. Obviously, this is done to mock Hal's weakness to the color and probably to actually weaken him, to be honest. Not only does Batman claim the moral high ground in their debate, but Robin actually manages to steal Green Lantern's ring in this issue, and then he, not Batman, is the one who proceeds to defeat him in a fistfight, even almost killing him, with Batman being forced to take aggressive action to save Hal's life. Also, could you imagine being in the ambulance that comes to this emergency call? You come into this safe house, everything's yellow everywhere, that would be so weird. Oh boy. Number 2, Batman kicks the Hulk and lives. In DC Special Series issue number 27 from 1981, we get a strange mashup of Batman and the Hulk. Like many superhero team-ups, especially involving crossovers between publishers, these two end up initially forced to fight one another, with the Hulk being led to believe that Batman is his enemy, having been manipulated by the Joker. And I think we all know how we'd imagine this fight would go. I mean, Hulk versus Batman, you would think the Hulk's definitely gonna win that fight. Batman is extremely skilled, but he is just a man. During their first fight, Batman desperately attempts to defeat the Hulk by using sleeping gas. However, Hulk understands that the gas is dangerous and decides to hold his breath. Batman surmises that he needs to find a way to make the Hulk breathe, because the Hulk could probably hold his breath forever, since his lungs are so big. First of all, Batman, I don't think that's the way lungs work. Just because the Hulk has a larger lung capacity doesn't mean he could hold his breath for longer, I don't think. His body is simply larger, which is why his lungs are bigger, and lung size doesn't necessarily correlate to being skilled at holding one's breath, at least not as far as I know. In fact, the Hulk being large would likely just mean that his body requires more oxygen, hence his larger lungs. Secondly, Batman kicks Hulk in the stomach to force him to breathe, which somehow works. Which is insane, considering that Batman is just a normal man with amazing skills. In other words, how did he succeed and also not shatter his leg in his attempt to do so? I mean, a kick from Batman to Hulk has to feel like nothing. And also, if Batman kicked the Hulk with enough force to do that, you would think he would mess himself up really bad. Number 1, Dollar Bill's cape. A lot of people say that capes are dumb. It's not just Edna Mode saying that. And if you were able to ask the Dollar Bill, I'm sure he'd actually agree with them. But you can't, because 1, he's a fictional character, and 2, he's dead. Dollar Bill is a minor character from Watchmen. He was a member of the Minutemen in the 1940s. While attempting to stop an armed bank robbery, his cape was caught in a revolving door and he was shot and killed. So, no capes!
Number 10. willing himself out of a cosmic cube. In Captain America issue 446 in 1968, the Red Skull has captured Captain America inside a cosmic cube, making Steve live in a fantasy where he saves Dr. Ernstein, Bucky never dies, and he gets to see his mother, giving him the goal of defeating the German Stash. You know, the task he was created for. His whole dream inside the cube is created from his subconscious desires. It's much like a real dream, where some things just don't make much sense at all. The dream takes place during World War II, but some people have cell phones, and there are technologically advanced airships. That kind of thing. Eventually, Cap and Bucky Barnes make their way to the bunker that the German Stash is supposedly in. But just as Steve is about to enter, his subconscious Bucky stops him. Bucky talks to Cap about how things here don't make much sense, how he's supposed to be dead, and how him saying all this is the Captain's subconscious just trying to break through. His subconscious tells him this is a dream. All of a sudden, Captain America is outside the cube and just outside the door to the Red Skull instead. Even the Red Skull is shocked that Captain America has the willpower to break out of a cosmic cube. Number 9. Smashed through multiple walls, beaten, and has a building dropped on his head. In Captain America Volume 4, number 31 and 32, Cap goes to visit his flame at the time, Rachel Layton, also known as Diamondback, who was working undercover for Red Skull. She turned on the Red Skull though because her love for Steve had grown and she couldn't kill him, which resulted in the Red Skull killing her. When Steve arrived, the Red Skull attacked in his superpowered suit. The fight involved Steve being thrown into and through multiple brick walls and through floors of an apartment building, being beaten rather ruthlessly by the Skull, and having the entire building demolished on top of him. Not to mention, this all happened after he had just found his lover dead. But Steve not only survived, he didn't break a single bone. He was able to get up and start fighting again. I mean, not very successfully, until the, surprise, not dead Rachel Layton intervened. Number 8. Used as a Cap missile by War Machine. Multiple times. In Secret Avengers number 10, the Secret Avengers have been distracted by a fake godlike entity in order for the mysterious group the Shadow Council, working with a group called the High Die, to kidnap Sharon Carter as a bargaining chip to trade for Shang-Chi, whose blood will allow the High Die to resurrect Shang-Chi's father, Zhang Zhu. But none of that matters. I just want to talk about when War Machine threw Captain America like a spear right into John Steele, another super soldier, slamming him into the ground in such a cool comic book image. Look at that! Captain America being Captain America just does a barrel roll out of it too. Completely unfazed. Number 7. Fighting Ultimate Hulk. In their first real battle against the Hulk, after he goes on a rampage through the city, the Ultimates try to bring down the big green guy. Giant Man and Iron Man both fail in their fights with Hulk, which is when Captain America enters the fray, dropping a whole tank on top of him. A tank that has Cap sitting inside of it. But this is the Hulk. And no puny tank dropped from hundreds of feet in the air is gonna stop him. Banner rips through the tank and engages Captain America directly. Or should I say that Cap engages him, putting up a hell of a fight, punching him in the face, kicking him where the sun don't shine, and shield bashing Hulk all over, until Hulk starts to absolutely pummel him. Luckily, Thor comes in to take Hulk's attention away, but he lived. He survived. Number 6. Having the super soldier serum sucked out of him. In Captain America Volume 7, Issue 21, the villain Iron Nail had gained control of a giant helicarrier mech called Gungnir, which is honestly really cool looking, and was using it to attack and destroy the city of Nirovekistan. I'm so sorry if I messed that up. The captain had infiltrated the mech and was confronting Iron Nail inside. Now look, his name may be lame, but in their fight he actually stabbed Captain America multiple times with tentacles that pulled the super soldier serum right out of his body. This caused Steve to be depowered, and on top of that, it rapidly aged the captain. Right as Steve was about to save the day too. Just kidding! Cap won, throwing his shield into Gungnir's core, and with the help from Sam Wilson, the Falcon defeated Iron Nail and escaped the mech.
Halfway through into number 5, CW Flashpoint. The CW Flashpoint is nothing like the Flashpoint we saw in the comics, aside from his mother being alive. This time around, Barry still has his speed, he just hasn't used it to become the Flash. Instead, he uses it to be creepy and steal something out of Iris's purse so that he can say she dropped it. This timeline gave Wally speed and made him Kid Flash, along with Edward Claris becoming the rival. But the main issue of this episode was going to be that Barry was losing his memories of the original timeline and, subsequently, his speed. As for how this wasn't instant, I don't know, but at the rate that it was going in the show, I'm surprised that Barry was able to release Thawne in time for him to reset the timeline. If Thawne hadn't have been captured, or Barry had just let his timeline set, in theory there would have been no Thawne. Since Barry was never the Flash, Thawne would never have to become his greatest enemy. So technically, if Barry reset the timeline, nobody would have known and Barry's life would have been perfect. Exactly what he wanted. I'm surprised that Barry didn't realize this and he just kind of let things go back to the way they were. I'm also surprised he didn't lose all his memories because he definitely should have. And at 4, the end of time. Last time I mentioned how Wally was able to race Black Flash to the end of time, causing death to have no meaning, thus destroying Black Flash, which didn't matter for long since later Barry Allen returned in the Flash Rebirth storyline, unknowingly becoming the new Black Flash, until Zoom took over the title after his corpse was raised in Blackest Night. But if you think about it, how did any of this actually start? Like, how does one run to the end of time and somehow survive it? Like, if death has no meaning, is that because nothing is alive in order to die? Because if Wally was at the end of time, seemingly that would give death a meaning, right? Or does being at the end of time make you, like, immortal? I'm unaware of the rules here. Because in my head, if he was at the end of time, there's no way he should have survived that. Like, how did he beat Black Flash? I mean, I know and I mentioned the whole Black Flash thing last time, but specifically this time, how did he get to the end of time? How does time end? Great, now I'm in an existential spiral. Getting close to the end in number 3, Dominators. Dominators are a race of extraterrestrial beings from Swan Moon. They are conquerors intent on maintaining the status quo in the universe by any means necessary, and with the unpredictable metahumans being their prime targets on Earth, and the primary antagonists of the Invasion crossover event on the CW. 65 years after an incident in 1951, with the appearance of metahumans, especially Barry Allen, the Dominators returned to Earth, prefaced with a warning to earthly authorities that they meant no harm, though were in fact planning a war. 4 ships crash landed, and one of them was in Central City, spilling forth with Dominators. As they headed down towards Earth, the mothership followed them. At this time, the Dominators were also about finished with their super weapon that they had intended to use to wipe out all metahumans on Earth. They threatened to drop it unless Barry Allen had surrendered himself within 24 hours, which he refused, after everyone convinced him not to. The reason they wanted Barry, though, was because of his power and the creation of Flashpoint. Jackson Professor Stein, also known as Firestorm, did end up transmuting the bomb meant to kill all metahumans into water, but I'm surprised that any metahumans came out of this one intact. How can you touch a bomb that is meant to destroy, I don't know. If it's poisonous to metahumans, I don't know how he was able to touch it. Penultimately, in at number 2, Nuclear Bomb. Barry, Vibe, Killer Frost, and Jesse Quick headed over to an Argus facility where a woman by the name of Veronica Dale intended to blow up Central City with a nuclear bomb. They ended up defeating her and her men, but failed to stop the detonation. Barry used this new ability where time is seemingly frozen around him completely after he realized that it was too late. Then he pointed out to Jesse, who was also moving in flash time with him, that moving the bomb somewhere else would only speed up the reaction, and the idea of traveling back in time is not a choice after all the problems Barry had caused by creating Flashpoint, because you know the whole Dominators thing too. They agreed that they couldn't stop the bomb, but that they also weren't enough to take everyone out of Central City. Barry then had the idea of calling Jay Garrick for help and sent Jesse to Earth 3 to get him. Everything they tried though failed, sending it to a dead Earth, freezing it, nothing. So Barry ended up trying to say goodbye to Iris, who instead told him to use the quark sphere that they had used to trick the Speed Force into thinking that he was still in there to fuse the atoms back together and prevent the detonation, which ended up working. This whole episode takes place within 5 seconds of real time and is probably the fastest Barry has ever moved, but it's still surprising how they managed to stop a nuclear bomb. It shouldn't have happened, I'm sorry. It's a good episode though. And finally, in number 1, Damian Wayne. Did you know that Damian Wayne has killed Wally West before? Well, in the past. As in, his present version traveled to the past to stop his heart. Essentially, this is all because of some time travel shenanigans. The Teen Titans and the Titans needed to stop a Speed Force empowered Deathstroke. To stop him, they needed to stop Wally from doing stuff in the future. So, Damian's first thought was, for some reason, to stop past Wally's heart for a couple seconds, long enough to alter the timeline, but not long enough to kill future Wally. This had the unintended consequence of giving past Wally a pacemaker, which ended up affecting the future Wally, who also now had to have this pacemaker, with Damian saying, quote, "The stone palm technique causes commotio cordis, a disruption of heart rhythm. He only has to die for a few seconds, long enough to disrupt the history of the Flash," so that basically Deathstroke wouldn't end up getting his speed. I don't know how that would work, especially if they brought him back after just a few seconds, but okay. This more or less screwed up his history and his heart, even though his heart started again. And this occurred within the pages of Teen Titans: The Lazarus Contract, but it still shouldn't have happened.
Coming in at number 10, we've got the time that Thor was left for dead adrift in space, as seen in the MCU film Avengers: Infinity War. Thor has a pretty brutal time during the two most recent Avengers movies, with Infinity War beginning with Thor having to watch both Loki and Heimdall die, and the Hulk be defeated by an intimidating new villain, Thanos. After this smackdown, Thor is left adrift in space with the remnants of the Asgardian refugee ship, something that would likely kill any human hero in the Marvel Universe, and yet Thor is able to survive until he conveniently bumps into the windshield of the Guardians of the Galaxy, showing that, I guess, Asgardians are just really, really good at holding their breath. Coming in at number 9, we have the time Malekith turned Thor's liver into broken glass, a magical punishment that makes me wince just thinking about it. Malekith might get a bad rap for his lackluster portrayal in the film Thor: The Dark World, but in the comics he's been a pain in Thor's side for generations, and in this case, I mean that pretty literally. During an event that saw multiple Thors from different points of his timeline fighting against the Dark Elves, Malekith used his magic to torture a young Thor, and claimed to have turned his liver into a mound of broken glass within his own body. Understandably, this upset Thor, and his response was to spit shards of glass into Malekith's face, which is probably the most badass way possible to respond to some heavy internal bleeding. Coming in at number 8, we have all the times that Thor has wrestled with the Hulk. Whether it's in comic books, animated television shows, or billion-dollar blockbusters, Thor has always been one of the few heroes capable of standing up to the strength of the Incredible Hulk, and this usually puts him into an awkward position whenever the Jade Giant inevitably goes on a rampage. Whether battling on the streets of Earth or the gladiator arenas of the planet Sakaar, Hulk and Thor will likely continue to test their strength against one another for many years to come, if only because Thor is one of the few people that can tank a green punch and keep on swinging. Coming in at number 7, we have the time Thor chose to tear out both of his eyes in pursuit of knowledge. Desperate for a way to prevent the destruction that would be caused by the Asgardian event of Ragnarok, Thor visited the Well of Mimir, where Odin had once given up his eye in exchange for forbidden knowledge. However, Thor was stunned after removing his eye to find that the well still would not fill with water for him, only to slowly realize that since his father had already sacrificed an eye, he would need to up the sacrifice in order to be granted knowledge. Thus, Thor did the extremely metal act of ripping out both of his eyeballs, and despite his now literal blindness, was able to see the proper path forward to save the entire Marvel Universe. Coming in at number 6, we have the multiple occasions that Thor has survived the power of the sun. As an Asgardian that's thousands of years old, Thor's adventures have spanned all across the cosmos, and have led to Thor being put in the most destructive situations possible more often than you'd think. While aiding Adam Warlock in the Infinity Watch, Thor found himself having to withstand the strength of a star going supernova, an explosion that left him dazed and confused in an unknown location, but still undeniably alive and uninjured. Combined with the times that Thor has shrugged off attacks that have claimed to be as powerful as multiple exploding suns, and the God of Thunder really has an impressive survival resume.
Number 5, the death of Superman. When a brutal and savage creature called Doomsday came to Earth, he had only one thing on his mind: destruction. He destroyed a small town and tore through the Justice League as they attacked him. No matter what was thrown at him, Doomsday would not go down. It soon became clear, as Doomsday continued to shrug off attacks, that this was a job for Superman. Superman went up against the creature as Metropolis bore the brunt of the damage. Doomsday was so powerful that Superman had to use the full force of his powers without holding back at all. He took an incredible beating, but managed to kill the creature in the end. Unfortunately, he had taken so much damage while doing so that he passed away in the arms of a distraught Lois Lane. So really, this fight is more of a tie when you think about it. The world was devastated at the loss of Superman as they mourned their hero in a massive funeral and wondered what would become of them now. Perhaps the most devastating element of this affair was that Superman's parents, John and Martha Kent, weren't able to attend their son's funeral as his secret identity would be compromised, and because Superman was entombed at a Metropolis memorial, they were unable to bury their son and instead had to bury a few of Clark Kent's possessions instead. Number 4. A death in the family. The Joker has made a long career of making Batman miserable by racking up massive body counts while enacting twisted schemes to bring Gotham City to its knees. Batman is usually able to stop the Joker before he achieves his ultimate goal, but sometimes the Clown Prince of Crime gets the better of the Dark Knight. The most infamous example of this was when the Joker captured the second Robin, Jason Todd. He beat him with a crowbar and left him in a warehouse that was rigged to explode. Batman almost got there in time to save Jason, but Robin was blown to smithereens. Batman tried to arrest the Joker, but in a bizarre twist, because the Joker was acting as the ambassador to Iran at the time, he was not charged with the crime due to diplomatic immunity. Batman did stop the Joker from completing his plan to gas the UN, but considering that Batman considers losing Jason his greatest failure, that kinda makes it the Joker's greatest win. And considering how much trauma the incident caused Jason once he returned to life, and the fact that it drove him to become a murderous vigilante whose relationship with Batman is tense at best as a result, it has been a long-lasting and fruitful victory for the Ace of Knaves known as the Joker, and a bitter defeat for the Dark Knight. Number 3. The Ultimatum Wave. In Ultimatum, Magneto has been driven mad at the loss of his children and decides that rather than destroying humanity in order to make the world safe for mutants, he's just gonna kill everyone. He uses a doomsday device and his powers to shift the world off of its axis, causing disasters all over the globe. Much of Europe, including all of Latveria, is frozen under a layer of ice, and New York is hit by a massive tidal wave. Millions of people all over the world die in the attack, including Nightcrawler and Hank McCoy. Magneto then sends out more of his minions to destroy the heroes, causing the brutal deaths of several more heroes, including Hank Pym, Doctor Strange, and Thor, just to name a few. The most devastating moment is when Pym finds his wife Janet being eaten by the Blob, and responds by entering his giant man form, picking up the Blob and biting his head off. Professor X gets personally murdered by Magneto, and all seems lost. The heroes are eventually able to stop Magneto from destroying the rest of the world, but the initial defeat caused millions of deaths of both heroes and civilians, and the resulting anti-mutant sentiment and pain of the survivors changed things in the Ultimate Universe forever. Number 2. Watchmen's Giant Squid. In the Watchmen universe created by Alan Moore, superheroes were outlawed and the United States and Russia are at the brink of nuclear war. The smartest man alive, Adrian Veidt, formerly the hero Ozymandias, came up with a plan to save the world at the cost of millions of lives. He cloned the brain of a murdered psychic and created a giant psychic squid which he planned to teleport into New York, where it would kill millions of people with a psychic attack, making the world think that they were under attack by aliens, causing them to unite against a common threat. It's slightly more complicated than that, but it's kind of hard to explain, and frankly, you should just read Watchmen if you haven't already. His plan was uncovered by the heroes of the book, who went to Veidt's Arctic Palace to confront him and try and stop him, but after explaining his evil plan, he clarified that he had already enacted his plan 35 minutes prior, and that they were too late to stop him. In order to preserve the peace that had been brought about as a result, the heroes were forced to go along with the charade charade that Ozymandias had concocted. Number 1. Green Lantern loses a planet. In the Cosmic Odyssey series, when the anti-life equation became a sentient creature, it split itself into 4 pieces. These anti-life aspects each went to a different planet, forcing Darkseid and Highfather to team up with Earth's heroes in order to stop them. Martian Manhunter and the Green Lantern John Stewart were sent to the planet Xanshi to deal with the threat and defuse a planet-destroying bomb. The two tracked down the explosive, but feeling that Martian Manhunter was out of his depth, an arrogant Stewart used his power ring to trap Martian Manhunter in a bubble and send him away, telling him that he would only slow him down. Unfortunately, when Green Lantern got to the explosive, he discovered that it had been painted yellow, making him incapable of defusing it with his ring. It went off, and though the ring protected Stewart and Manhunter from the blast, the planet and all of its inhabitants were killed due to the Green Lantern's arrogance and carelessness. Martian Manhunter was understandably furious at Stewart, and the Green Lantern was obviously racked with guilt that never really went away. He certainly grew from the experience, but there are few things more devastating than failing to save an entire planet because you were overconfident in your own abilities.
Number 10. Superman's new costume. Superman at one point had a new costume made for him. The costume was created for him by Lex Luthor, but Superman apparently didn't recognize his bald nemesis because he was in a disguise, i.e. he was wearing a wig. The other fail here on Superman's part comes from the fact that there was literally something built into the suit that he should have noticed. A giant ball of lead. Well, maybe not a giant ball of lead, but a sizable ball of lead. You'd think Superman would see that and immediately be suspicious, because although yes, he can't actually use his X-ray vision on lead, that makes it a lot more obvious that like, hey, that's lead. The lead actually contained kryptonite, Superman's weakness, and Luthor designed the suit so that he could trigger when the lead would be eroded away by acid to reveal the kryptonite, which would weaken Superman at the most opportune time. Also, Superman, this suit is just not very good. How did you not notice something was up with this? It literally has a giant green box across the chest that just reads in blocky letters Superman, and it's bright yellow with purple accents. Bruh. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like? Number 9. Big Barda is defeated by her own weapon. At one point, Big Barda is living on Earth and she has her purse stolen. The man who steals it takes chase, not realizing who he is just stolen from and that a powerful weapon, her Mega Rod, is in that purse. While escaping into the sewers, he runs into another being from Apocalypse, Sleaze. Sleaze takes the purse, and when Big Barda finally catches up, surprises her by knocking her out with her own weapon, because he knows how to use a Mega Rod. He later would use the Mega Rod to control Barda's mind and will, and even tried to force her and Superman to make a raunchy tape together using Barda's Mega Rod. Oh geez, Sleaze. Ugh. Number 8. Wonder Woman is bound. One of the dumbest ways that Wonder Woman has been defeated actually correlates to one of her most classic and well-known weaknesses, being bound. In fact, traditionally, this only worked if she was bound by a man. Doing so would reduce her to becoming simply mortal, stripping away all her godlike powers and abilities. Although, to be fair, even a normal woman might be strong or skilled enough to actually escape these bonds. So you would think Wonder Woman might also be. And yes, I understand that this weakness also has symbolic significance for this character, but relative to the character and how powerful she normally is, it's still kinda dumb. Because it's like, yeah, you're powerful all the time, but if a man bounds you, that's it? You just lose it all? Wow. Harsh. Number 7. Hulk loves puppies. If you can believe it, at one point Hulk was actually defeated by his love of puppies. This was revealed to be a method that S.H.I.E.L.D. used to successfully calm Hulk down. Hulk has even stated in the comics before that his favorite animal is a dog, so I guess this makes sense in that regard, but that doesn't make it any less ridiculous. Hence why it's on this list. Number 6. Barbara Gordon forgets her training. This has always been a weird superhero defeat that has baffled me personally. So Barbara Gordon is Batgirl, right? And yet in The Killing Joke, which admittedly is a story that initially was intended to exist purely outside of canon and still sort of does, Barbara is accosted by the Joker pretty easily. Now granted, this was while Barbara was in her civilian form and was visiting her father, Jim Gordon, at his home. So she goes to answer the door and is surprised to see the Joker there, who shoots her in the stomach. I understand being surprised, and I understand not wanting to reveal your identity as Batgirl, but come on. This is Babs! I feel like she could have handily disarmed the Joker here with everything else I know about her and how skilled she is. Or at least she should have been able to, in my headcanon. Maybe I'm being unreasonable to assume this, but I really don't think so. Also, I feel like even if you're like, oh, I gotta protect my secret identity by doing nothing, you could still do something. I mean, you are Jim Gordon's daughter, so I feel like people would assume you have some kind of combat training. Number 5. Corrupted by endless rage and bloodlust. One of the things that almost completely consumed and overwhelmed the Venom symbiote was its sense of rage. This started possibly when it was kidnapped and weaponized by an alien arms dealer, but progressively got worse with time as it soaked up the emotions of its hosts when it came to Earth, especially Spider-Man. There was a lot of emotions with Spider-Man. Eddie Brock was a big part likely of the Venom symbiote's sense of rage as well, but even then the symbiote became too aggressive for even him, and at one point he actually had to be like, I think I'm out. Later it would bond with Matt Gargan, which definitely made things a lot worse. The only thing that would save it from all this rage, hate, violence, and bloodlust, which it couldn't seem to really escape, was being reunited with the symbiote Hive during its time bonded with Flash Thompson. Here, the Venom symbiote was purified, allowing it to go on in the world without drowning in emotional turmoil, and freeing the symbiote to truly become a hero while bonded to Flash as Agent Venom. Number 4, devoured by a dragon. Well, sort of. It was more like Venom was like enveloped by a symbiote dragon. This was when Eddie Brock first ran into Null and learned the darker history of the symbiotes, including the history of his other, the Venom symbiote. Venom was fighting with Miles when they came to, and that was when Null and his symbiote dragon arrived, or well, a version of Null. In reality, this was not Null's true form, as he was still far away and not really fully awakened yet, but he was beginning to wake up, and even as a sort of symbiotic projection, this version of Null was still quite strong. After blowing up the dragon, it reformed and then kind of enveloped them while they talked with Null, which they probably didn't realize until it was too late. In the end, Venom only escaped because of the help of Miles Morales' Spider-Man, who distracted Null just long enough for them to get away, cutting through the dragon, who it turns out was in mid-flight once more, only to plummet down to Earth. Another thing, they survived because Venom had now gained the power to make wings, probably as a result of its interaction with Null and his dragon. Number 3, Red Goblin. Well, Venom might be a pretty tough cookie now in the comics, and quite OP as a character and as a symbiote even alone. When Venom, bonded with Eddie Brock, came up against Red Goblin, the Carnage symbiote bonded with Norman Osborn, who had also recently been repowered with the Goblin Serum, it was no surprise the Venom appeared to be pretty outclassed. Despite the fact that it struggled to keep up, the Venom symbiote and Eddie both managed to survive this fight relatively well. Eddie even managed to get a few good hits in too before he called it quits. Venom would end up bonded to Spider-Man for a good amount of that fight, and also managed to survive till the end, with both the Venom and the Carnage symbiotes basically being dismissed, just as Spider-Man and Green Goblin decided to duke it out themselves. Sadly, as well, Venom would also survive the death of his friend and former host, Flash Thompson. Number 2, died and went to hell. During the Venom symbiote's time bonded to Flash Thompson, at one point they crossed paths with Mephisto's evil son, Blackheart. While battling against Blackheart, who was attempting to bring hell to all of Earth, they ended up dying. Because they were already on the threshold of hell when they all died, with Blackheart beginning to bring hell to the surface world, Venom went to hell, like actual hell. And yet, despite being there, Venom and the rest of the team he found himself with were able to escape by making a deal with Mephisto. Not something they wanted to do, but kind of something they had to do in the end. As a result, he survived the whole ordeal and was returned to Earth. Hell Earth, but they ended up fighting back against Blackheart and making it full Earth again. Number 1, thrown off a skyscraper and killed! During the King in Black event, I think we all had a certain expectation when it came to how we expected that story to go. It was the event that Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman had been building up to since Venom issue number 1 of their 2018 series. The final showdown was about to happen between Venom and the god of symbiotes, Null, and we knew it would likely be up to Venom and possibly his son Dylan to save the day, which is why many of us were left in amazement when, kind of near the beginning of this event, Venom faced off with Null only to be thrown to his death from up high off a building. Venom was absorbed back back into Null, seemingly amalgamated back into the Hive, and kind of forced to go with the flow, basically snapped back into order, and Eddie was left alone just to die. Fortunately, despite Venom dying, they would find their way back to life and ultimately succeed in defeating Null, and even ended up replacing him, becoming the new ruler of Clintar and all the symbiotes throughout the universe.
In its 10th Future Flash. While Savitar was introduced as the Future Flash in the show, the real Future Flash is very different in the comics. When Iris and Wally get into a car accident, Wally dies and Iris is paralyzed. Blaming himself for not being there, Barry ends up becoming a much darker hero. He kills Reverse Flash, Mirror Master, and Grodd before turning his attention on the past. The Speed Force has a tear in it, and Barry kills his younger self and uses the energy to seal it. Good Barry then ends up waking up in the Savage World, a place outside of time, and uses his intelligence to return to the normal world, and fights against his future self once again. The two then team up against a different villain who wants to use the Speed Force to destroy the world, and older Barry creates an explosion large enough to kill the villain, which was technically himself. Well, I guess to kill the villain they were fighting as well as himself. A version of himself, the good version though, did end up surviving this, which is pretty nuts. And at 9 Elseworlds. The Elseworlds crossover event for the CW Arrowverse shows was certainly an interesting plot point for various characters. I mean, we saw Oliver Queen become the Flash and Barry Allen become the Green Arrow. However, it's surprising that they ended up actually living through this. That anyone survived this. Because a reality-altering book should really have caused a lot more damage than it did. I mean, they destroy the book and everything goes back to normal seemingly, but in my personal opinion, that's not how this should have worked, okay? The book, if it was really altering reality, would have made these changes permanent. And Deegan should have ended up thinking bigger than just swapping a couple people's identities and making the heroes the bad guys, then making yourself the Superman of an Earth without a Superman. It seems like a load of wasted potential there. Even if you don't have good intentions, I think that there's a lot more that you could have done. And if this was real, nobody would ever recover from this, physically or financially. And it ain't getting powers back. When superheroes get their powers, it's usually a one and done thing. But it's always a good plot point to somehow lose them and then need to get them back, or at least the writers think so. This has happened multiple times with the Flash over the years, most notably in the Flashpoint timeline, where Barry didn't have his speed and turned to Thomas Wayne to help get them back. Barry was strapped to a wooden chair in a rainstorm surrounded by the chemicals he was around when he got his powers the first time, and then was struck by lightning. This left him with third-degree burns all over his body, so Wayne wrapped him up like a mummy in bandages, but luckily he got his powers back and was able to deal with those burns quickly. But it's honestly a real shock that this didn't kill him, considering how he got his powers from becoming the lightning bolt that struck him in the first place, and then the Speed Force choosing him and all that crap. But nevertheless, he got them back. And while it seems obvious, like of course he would, there is another version of this story. In the Dark Multiverse Flashpoint story, Barry Allen actually dies trying to get his powers back. Instead of getting his powers back, he gets third-degree burns and dies. So Eobard Thawne ends up claiming the title of the Flash and tries to stop the war between the Amazons and the Atlanteans by killing Arthur and threatening Diana. Obviously this doesn't go well, but it was possible for Barry to die. It just resulted in the darkest timeline. In its 7th, Bloodwork. After saving Ralph from Bloodwork, or Ramsey Rosso's blood, Barry saw his mother, who was really the Speed Force, at least on the show. She came to warn him that when he had saved Ralph's life through a blood transfusion, a small amount of Ramsey's blood was transferred into Barry, and now that blood was trying to bind Barry to Ramsey's will. Barry then found himself struggling between choosing the Speed Force or Ramsey trying to convince him that if he joins him, he will actually end up surviving Crisis and can have the life he always wanted, with Nora as his child and with Iris. The Speed Force was trying to convince him to not listen to Ramsey. Barry eventually seems to reject Ramsey, claiming that his lines were so convincing. However, the Speed Force told him that Ramsey wasn't lying. This causes Barry to get angry at the Speed Force, since he never had any choice of becoming the Flash. It had chosen him. And ever since then, he's been doing what the Speed Force wants. Then Barry wakes up at Star Labs, after Cisco and Frost found him lying on his apartment floor in pain. They determined that Ramsey's blood had found its way inside him, but now Barry claims to have beaten it. However, Iris noticed that Barry is acting strangely, and she quietly walks away and tells Cisco and Frost that it's not Barry. They walk slowly up to him and he turns around, now having a twisted face due to Ramsey's infection. He speeds away with Black Lightning and joins Ramsey, but later on it's revealed that he was double-crossing Ramsey. But realistically, he shouldn't have been able to, but oh well. Paragon of love, right? And it's 6, Blackest Night. Blackest Night involves Necron, a personified force of death who reanimates deceased superheroes and seeks to eliminate all life and emotion from the universe. Because, you know, that's every villain's goal. Jeff Johns has identified the series' central theme as emotion, and the crossover was published for 8 months as a limited series in both the Green Lantern and the Green Lantern core comic titles. However, the most befuddling thing was that all the heroes and villains who were raised from the dead somehow lost, despite their Black Lantern rings. Reverse Flash even ended up being brought back and fought against the Flash. During Blackest Night, Thawne's corpse returned as a member of the Black Lantern Corps, resurrected by his power ring. This version called himself the New Black Flash and immediately sought out the Flash and began tormenting him to feed on his emotions. This version was only the reanimated corpse of Zoom though, well, for lack of a better term, and did not have any memories from after his own death. It was not aware that an alternate version of Zoom had since appeared or that Flash had died and come back.
Number 5. Gets his costume charged by Gambit, who explodes it. During the X-Men vs. Avengers event, one-shot comics were produced that pitted single Avengers versus single X-Men. While a lot of these were great stories, there was one that stood out as a surprise. That would be the AVX vs. Volume 1 number 2, that pitted Spider-Man against Juggernaut and Steve Rogers against none other than Remy LeBeau Gambit. For those of you who don't know, Gambit has the unusual mutant ability to convert the potential energy stored in an object into kinetic energy. Basically, turning objects into bombs. Captain America is, well, Captain America though, and he gets a little cocky, not thinking much of the X-Men. After failing the obvious tactic of using Cap's shield as a kinetic bomb, Gambit surprises Cap, charging Steve's armor and catching Steve off guard with a huge explosion. But when the dust settles, Gambit did nothing but get Cap's full, undivided attention. Cap rushes Remy, using his shield to guard against Remy's charged playing cards, and takes him out with a swift uppercut. I'm still a huge fan of Gambit though, can't lie. Number 4, a backhand from Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. During the iconic fight between the Avengers and the Mad Titan armed with the completed Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos easily beats almost all of the Avengers. Near the end of the fight, only Captain is left, and he calls Thanos out to battle him one-on-one. Cap's got some great lines here. As long as one man stands against you, Thanos, you will never be able to claim victory. A swing from the Mad Titan, and a dodge from Steve. But when hands sprout out of the ground, holding Steve in place, Thanos swings down on Cap's shield, yelling, "Then die you shall," and completely shatters the shield of Captain America. As he is about to land a killing blow on Steve, the Silver Surfer shows up in the nick of time and distracts Thanos, who, after getting a little punch from Cap, instead knocks Steve out cold with a quick backhand to the face. Not bad for an enhanced human against a mutant Eternal wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, who even the cosmic beings have trouble with. Unfortunately, us here at Top 10 Nerd, we don't have a super soldier serum. We gotta do this to survive. And it's because of you guys that we are able to do that. When you guys subscribe and like our videos, it lets YouTube know that we deserve to be here. Thank you guys for all your support. Alright, number 3. Thrown into an energy core and surviving. In Captain America number 38 in 1998, Captain America faces an adversary known as Protocide, a revived proto-super soldier. Protocide was given fake memories that back in World War II, Steve Rogers had killed him to remain the only American super soldier, which obviously isn't true. During a fight between the two, and a ton of Hydra agents, Cap saves Protocide from falling into an energy core. How does Protocide thank him? By throwing Steve into the energy core to kill him. Steve somehow survives using his shield as a platform to stand on while trying to think of a way out of the core. He quickly decides to sacrifice his own protection, subjecting himself to the full power of the core, to instead use his shield with the help of S.H.I.E.L.D., that's the acronym S.H.I.E.L.D., not the actual vibranium shield, to bust his way out of there with his clothes ripped to shreds and his body still intact. If that's the power of peak human conditioning, sign me up. Number 2, Zola virus. When Captain Rogers is teleported to the Zola dimension in Captain America Volume 7 in 2013, he is infected with a virus called the Zola virus, which puts him in constant pain and attempts to slowly take over his mind. While in Dimension Z, Steve gets his butt beat by Jet Zola, Arnim Zola's daughter, who counters his every move, almost breaking his back, and pushes him into a crowd of mutates who chew him up a bit. Then his ribs are broken and beaten by gamma-mutated cloned monstrosities of himself called Captain Zolandia. He gets blasted by Zola using his robotic body, and to top off the fight, he falls off of a cliff. Cap then just gets up, and using a knife, he cuts the Zola virus out of his chest. He cut a hole in his own chest and went on fighting. His mother did tell him getting back up was always the right thing to do though. Number 1, getting capped in the dome. Captain America has been shot so many times it makes 50 Cent jealous. Cap's been shot in the gut from a sniper, shot in the shoulder, shot in the leg multiple times and didn't even notice or care. But did you know that Steve Rogers has been capped in the dome? In Captain America and the Falcon issue 13 in 2011, Captain America takes a bullet to the dome that was meant for Sam Wilson. He was immediately rushed to hospital, and though he put up a fight, he was pronounced dead at 3:08 a.m. At the beginning of the next issue though, he suddenly wakes up, with the cause of his revival being placed on his, and I'm quoting this, unique metabolism. Captain America died for a grand total of 12 minutes that day, but he survived because of his metabolism. What?
Number 10, Deceased Batman. In the Deceased universe, the world is infected with an anti-life virus that infects people and turns them into zombies when they look at a screen. This story is apocalyptic in nature, so naturally there are a lot of brutal moments of heroes being killed by the zombie hordes. Probably the most devastating of them is what happens to the Bat family. Nightwing and Tim Drake are infected by the virus and go to Wayne Manor and attack Batman and Alfred. They bite the Dark Knight, infecting him. Alfred is forced to put down Dick and Tim with a shotgun, and Batman tries to slow the infection by getting into one of Mr. Freeze's cryosuits. He puts together a package for Damian containing a batsuit for him and turns. Alfred is forced to put him down with a shotgun and leaves the cave, thinking about how he had to put an end to 3 of his children. To make things even worse, in a later story in this universe, it is discovered that there is actually a cure for the virus, and Alfred has to grapple with the fact that he killed his sons when they could have been saved. Number 9, Old Man Logan. On Earth 800,007,128, where the Old Man Logan story takes place, Captain America's old foe, the Red Skull, managed to organize all of the Earth's supervillains and used them to defeat all of the heroes of their world and take over the United States. As he explained to a dying Captain America, Abomination was given California, although a crazed Hulk gang would eventually take this over. Dr. Doom was given the Bible Belt, and Magneto was given Las Vegas, although this was eventually taken over by the Kingpin. Red Skull took over the White House and installed himself as dictator. Worst of all was how the villains defeated the X-Men. Wolverine was monitoring the situation with Jubilee when the X-Mansion was suddenly attacked by supervillains. As the children fled, Wolverine made a brave final stand against the bad guys, cutting them down one at a time until there were none left. It was then that Mysterio revealed that the whole thing had been an illusion, and Logan had been attacking his own teammates the entire time. This was so devastating that Logan walked away from the situation due to his guilt, letting the villains take over and vowing to never pop his claws again. Number 8, Injustice Superman. One of the most devastating defeats that we've ever seen is the one that broke Superman's spirit and turned him from a hero into a villain. In the world featured in the Injustice games and comics, the Joker has become bored with dealing with Batman and decides to try his luck going up against the Man of Steel. Joker brainwashed Superman into destroying Metropolis as well as Lois Lane and his unborn child. This caused Superman to snap and set aside all the morality that he was known for, and he brutally killed the Joker. This began a chain reaction of events that led to Superman deciding to punish all of the criminals and reshape the world in his image, becoming more unhinged and violent the more power he seized, eventually becoming a full-on dictator, who Batman was forced to fight with an insurgency. The Joker may not have survived his encounter with Superman, but the fact that he was able to make him destroy everything he loved, break his moral code, and turn into the very thing he was fighting against, plunging the world into a horrifying dystopia, makes this a pretty good win for the Clown Prince of Crime. This Old Man Logan and the Deceased entry would normally rank higher, but as none of these events are canon to the main universe, I've decided to keep them at the bottom of the list so we can focus on defeats that actually really happened. Number 7. Alpha Flight Number 12. When the villainous Jerome Jackson discovered that his old employee who had ruined his life, James Hudson, was now a superhero leading Canada's super team Alpha Flight, he vowed revenge and sold Hudson's identity to the evil Roxxon Corporation, who gave him the resources to form the villain team Omega Flight, whose only purpose was to kill Hudson. They set a trap for James, tricking him into moving to New York for a job and then attacking him. Jackson attacked Guardian using the box robot, but Guardian managed to use his suit's power supply to overload the robot, killing Jackson. However, this caused Guardian's suit to overload and blow up, setting him on fire right in front of his wife, Heather. This was obviously deeply traumatic for Heather and the team, and they actually disbanded for a time as a result of this loss. Even when Hudson returned to life a few years later, things were never really the same for him, with his relationship to his wife being consistently strained as a result of his untimely death. So, this is a superhero defeat that has defined the character's entire life going forward, coloring it with an inescapable misery. Number 6. The death of Gwen Stacy. For a lot of his early run as the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn had no memories of his criminal activities, due to the Goblin being a separate personality. Green Goblin tangled with Spider-Man several times over the years, with Goblin eventually swearing to bring misery and pain into Spider-Man's life as revenge for always stopping his schemes. He eventually was able to follow Spidey and watch him change in an alley, discovering that he was really Peter Parker. Osborn eventually became aware of his Goblin side and embraced it, and concocted a scheme to ruin Spider-Man's life. It's not actually a particularly complicated scheme when you think about it. In Amazing Spider-Man number 121, the Green Goblin kidnapped Peter's girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, and then threw her off of a bridge. Spider-Man managed to snag her with a web, but the whiplash caused by her sudden stop caused her to break her neck. So, the Goblin achieved his goal of causing Peter as much pain as possible.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Norse event of Ragnarok. In ancient prophecy spelling both doom and rebirth for every living being in Asgard, the concept of Ragnarok has been used for multiple events throughout Thor's lifetime, and even adapted into one of the best MCU films. In the comics, however, Thor spent many years attempting to prevent Ragnarok, and when Asgard was finally fated to be destroyed, Thor defied the gods who had created the Asgardians and destroyed the World Tree, ending the constant cycle of Ragnarok and relocating Asgard to float directly above the state of Oklahoma. Definitely an odd way to end a story about the end of the universe, but hey, at least Thor's still alive. Coming in at number 4, we have the time Thor was destroyed by, who else? The Destroyer. During the big relaunch of Thor's self-titled series during the late 90s, Thor once again had to face off against one of his earliest foes, the Destroyer, as it relentlessly attacked the rest of the Avengers. In a stunning twist for a first issue of a new series, Thor was actually killed by this version of the Destroyer and sent to the realm of Hell, where Thor had to bargain and fight his way out of his imprisonment to return to Earth and save the rest of the Avengers. Does it still count as survival if you actually did die, you just don't stay in the afterlife though? Who knows at this point in the Marvel Universe. Coming in at number 3, we have the time Thor was turned to glass and then shattered by Thanos. In the MCU films, Thor and Thanos built up quite the intense and personal rivalry over just a couple films, but their confrontation in the comics version of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline somehow managed to knock the God of Thunder even lower. Thanos' reality-warping powers were put to use during his final battle, and just when Thor seemed ready to bring his hammer down on Thanos' head, the God of Thunder was turned to glass and then shattered, a humiliating defeat against a villain who, at this point, had complete control of the laws of the universe. Better luck next team-up event, Thor. Coming in at number 2, we have Thor surviving 3 direct attacks from the Celestial Arishem. If you've seen Marvel's Eternals in the past year, you know just how huge Arishem is, and with Celestials being some of the most powerful beings throughout the entire Marvel universe, they are not creatures you want to mess with. However, after believing Arishem had killed his father Odin, Thor relentlessly attacked the Celestial with his hammer, refusing to back down even as Arishem brought his full strength down on him. finally claiming defeat by throwing the Celestial's own magical sword through his chest, even if by the end of this fight, Thor looked like his entire costume had been put through a shredder. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the time Thor survived the torture of the God Butcher for over 2 weeks. Gorr the God Butcher has been one of Thor's biggest foes for the last decade of comics, and this year we'll finally get to see the villain on screen portrayed by Christian Bale in the MCU film Thor: Love and Thunder. In the comics, Gorr is attempting to murder every deity across the Marvel Universe, and after capturing a young Thor, boasts that even gods of torture can only last moments under his interrogation techniques. Amazingly, Thor held out against Gorr's torture for 17 days, before finally being able to free himself due to the arrival of his Viking allies. This scenario would scar Thor physically and mentally for many ages to come, but being able to survive the God Butcher for such a long time is something Thor should be truly proud of.
Number 10, relationship with Eddie Brock. The love that Eddie and the Venom symbiote feel for one another is strong. So strong, in fact, that it has messed both of them up quite a bit over the years. In fact, this got so intense that when they finally joined back together following some time apart, Eddie Brock didn't really know what to do with the symbiote. It was different. It had been with other hosts, it was scared, and it desperately wanted to rekindle its relationship with Eddie and keep the two of them together forever. In desperation to stay bonded with its host, Venom was willing to do anything, including kill anyone who got in the way of its obsession with and love of Eddie Brock. This included even killing a priest who suggested that the relationship sounded unhealthy to Brock. And even after all they have been through, including multiple offspring, battling their own offspring, lies, secrets, deceit, shame, guilt, fighting heroes, becoming a hero, devouring people, they still have managed somehow to keep the relationship alive and both stay alive themselves all the while. That's pretty crazy considering the rate of divorce these days. Number 9, experimented on. Not only has the Venom symbiote survived being forcibly separated from their host, but while in isolation, they also survived the forced experimentation of the Life Foundation, who forced the symbiote to produce a number of offspring for the Life Foundation's own uses. The whole process did not seem pleasant for either the symbiote or really for Eddie. The Life Foundation took 5 offspring from Venom with force and left the symbiote drained and exhausted as a result. They also kept poor Venom in a sonic prison, which meant escape attempts would result in agony and be pretty tricky. And beyond that, they also had sonic weapons to be used at the ready. When Venom tried to utilize their human half of Eddie, this only made the Life Foundation wonder if Eddie Brock's life was actually worth anything to them. Yikes. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Venom lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, escaped Null. Well, really, I suppose that Venom was outcast for refusing to follow Null, but still, I'm surprised that the symbiote survived that entire falling out. Based on what we saw of Null during the King in Black event, he seems like a ruler who would be more inclined to destroy those that refuse to follow him as opposed to letting them go. Or, you know, just like make them rejoin the Hive forcefully and take away their individualism, which is also what happened. Still, the Venom symbiote in issue 35 of the 2018 series, which is also legacy issue number 200, shares with Dylan that this is why their name, which is actually not something pronounceable by humans as it is communicated through vibrations associated with the emotional spectrum, is so different from the other symbiotes around, because they were cast out of the Hive. Perhaps Null believed that casting out the Venom symbiote would have been enough to kill them, but if that was his thought process, it seems that he greatly underestimated this little symbiote that could. Number 7, Lee Price. Anytime I go back to reading these issues with Lee Price, it just breaks my heart and kind of ties my stomach in knots. Poor Venom. It's amazing to think about just all that the symbiote went through while bonded with Lee Price, who really was a jerk. How much they were mistreated, and then of course, how they ended up taking all the trauma they suffered and managing to use it to propel them into something greater, something better, as they continued to work towards being the hero that their partner, Flash Thompson, had taught them that they could be. Yay! Venom at this time as well needed a host, so they didn't really have much of a choice but try and stick with Lee because that was the only option at the time, despite the fact that they disagreed with his morals. Lee Price was really awful to the Venom symbiote, and not only that, but also made some pretty bad decisions just in general for what kind of activity the two of them would get involved in. Fortunately, Venom was able to survive their relationship and come out of it much stronger even. Silver lining. Number 6, escaped symbiotic prison. Which is pretty crazy when you consider that technically the Venom symbiote was also on the death row of symbiote prison. That's right, they were ready to eliminate the symbiote for wanting to bond with his hosts, working with them as a team as opposed to dominating them. This could be a different version of the story where the Venom symbiote was kicked out of the hive, or it could be something that happened later after the symbiote was kicked out, which seems to be what the canon is leading us to now. Either way, instead of being vaporized following its imprisonment where it was to be studied by the other symbiotes, it only managed to evade its sentence by sheer luck, it seems. The prison lab in which it was being held was transported to Battleworld, where the symbiote was then released by Peter Parker, making its first appearance in terms of comic book history. Number 5, buried alive. What would our part 2 be without some more times that Batman was buried alive? As I said on my part 1 of this list, Batman getting buried alive is so weirdly common in comics that we might actually be able to do a list about just the times he managed to survive that. This time he was buried alive in the DCAU in the direct-to-video animated film Justice League Doom. Doom is definitely inspired by the comic book story arc Tower of Babel, where Batman's defensive contingency plans for the rest of his League teammates, should they fly off the handle or turn evil, are basically used against him and the League. In Doom, the Legion of Doom, led by Vandal Savage, uses these to their advantage, and incapacitates the rest of the League after Batman is buried alive in his own father's coffin. Batman not only escapes, but also manages to help Cyborg save the fellow members of the League, as well as save the Earth from Savage's evil plan to eliminate 2/3 of its population. Number 4, fighting Superman. Really, when you think about the fact that Bruce Wayne is just a man, I mean an extremely skilled and intelligent and determined man, still just a man, it's impressive to think how he has gone toe-to-toe with so many superpowered opponents. During Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, one such superpowered opponent happened to be Superman himself. And this wasn't peak physique Batman either. This was Bruce's like an old Batman, coming out of retirement basically to take on Superman. Batman, of course, seemingly dies in his fight against Superman when he appears to suffer from a heart attack during their final fight. But of course, this was all a clever ruse. There was no heart attack. In reality, Batman just ingested poison to fake his death, and the kicker is that Clark actually knows that's what happened, but is, gonna be cool about it. Kinda makes you wonder if this whole fight actually needed to happen in the first place, really. And in Hush, a younger Batman doesn't just survive fighting a mind-controlled Superman commanded by Poison Ivy to kill him, he completely beats Supes, so there's also that. Number 3, Joker ruining his life. During the events of Joker War and leading up to it, Joker attempted to completely ruin Batman's life. And I feel like in many ways he kind of succeeded. He took all of Bruce Wayne's money and used it to turn Gotham into a war zone. Batman was struggling on all fronts here. Not only that, but leading up to the events of Joker War near the end of their Dark Design story arc in issue number 93 of the 2016 Batman series, Batman ended up fighting Deathstroke and being stabbed straight through the thigh. Ouch. Deathstroke was working for Joker, it turned out, and the Bat ended up being in pretty bad shape even going into that war because of this. Not only was his money and health taken from him, but Joker had Punchline also blast him with her own special brew of Joker Venom, blended with some fear toxin, a little bit of Bane's Venom juice, which left him wrestling with his sanity and struggling to discern reality for a good amount of the story. Number 2, just a torso and a head. In the Dark Multiverse, the worst kind of gruesome survival becomes possible. Although he be an alternate Batman and Bruce Wayne, he is still Batman and Bruce Wayne, so I think we can count this one even though it is an alternate version. I'm talking about the Batman from the Tales of the Dark Multiverse Batman Nightfall story. This Batman becomes known as the Broken. In this version of the Nightfall story arc conclusion, Night's End, Batman does not succeed in taking back his cape and cowl from Azrael, whom he loaned them to look after Gotham in his absence. Instead, Azrael wins that battle and becomes cemented as Gotham's champion, taking the name later of Saint Batman. Azrael removes Bruce's limbs, but keeps him alive, reduced to just his torso and his head. Here, Azrael also seems to enjoy somewhat visiting and tormenting Bruce, as he aims to prove that he is the better Batman between them. Eventually, Bruce escapes Azrael and goes on to become the Broken, a nanotech cyborg Batman whose torment actually shapes him into something much worse than his own captor in the end. Number 1, fighting the Reverse Flash. When it comes to fighting someone out of his power class like Superman, at least Batman has knowledge on his side. He knows Clark pretty well well. So fighting Superman, he's got a few aces up his sleeves, as someone who is known for creating the perfect plans and for his own deductive skills. But when it comes to someone like the Reverse Flash, this is an impossibly powerful villain and someone that Batman does not know as intimately in the slightest. So what's a Bat to do? Well, mainly just stall for time. Batman uses what he knows to make a plan. He knows he can't win against Reverse Flash, he has some knowledge of how the Flash would handle a fight like this, and fortunately, he knows that his friend, the Flash, Barry Allen, will be back at the Batcave shortly, which means he really only has to survive until Barry gets back. Counting down the seconds till Barry returns, Batman simply does his best to stall and survive, knowing that the Flash can take Thawne on. Fortunately, he not only survives till then, but he also gets lucky when Barry is late, with Reverse Flash picking up the Watchmen button that was in the Batcave, traveling to the other pre-New 52 reality, and ultimately getting zapped by Dr. Manhattan and killed before he can return to Batman's and the New 52 world.